Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, and welcome to the next episode of the Hard Compound Live. A very special Hard Compound Live, because as you may have seen in the last few days, this is our 100th live video interview. Absolutely astonishing that we've got to this milestone, given that when the Hard Compound started, live interviews weren't even on the radar. So before we go any further, huge thanks to the 99 guests that have joined us so far. Thank you to all of you who have tuned in and who have supported the page and have engaged with all the posts that we put out 2 or 3 times a day on our Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. So do search for the Hard Compound on those 3 platforms. We're also on YouTube, where these live interviews go out. So as I said, these interviews go out on YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter. They are live, of course, as this one is, and they're also saved automatically for your viewing pleasure in the video section on Facebook and in the live section on our YouTube. To celebrate this evening, we have got the perfect guest for our 100th live broadcast, show, interview, whatever you'd like to call it. An incredible encyclopedic knowledge of all things motorsport, on track, off track. Fantastic writer, fantastic journalist, fantastic author, and he has a penchant for the land speed record as well. We're going to bring him in very shortly, but just to give you a bit of a lowdown on who we have spoken with over the last 2.5 years or so that we've been doing these. I'm not going to name all 99 of them, but we've had the honor and the privilege of speaking with Mr. Mario Andretti, with Mr. Jackie Hicks, and with Mr. John Watson recently. We've spoken with Mike Wilds, Mr. Roberto Moreno, guys like we've spoken with David Brabham, Derek Warwick, Mark Blundell, Eddie Cheever, Emanuele Pirro, Karen Chandhok, Ari Lyondike, Carl Wendlinger, Emanuele Pirro, I think I said before, Mark Schurer, Roberto Moreno, Raul Boisel, many others, including the British touring car drivers, past and present, from Jason Plato to Rob Gravick to Frank Sittner to Steve Soper to Fabrizio Giovanardi, Tom Coronel, Andy Prio, and some of the current crop as well. Plenty of fantastic guests for you to check out as and when you wish. But don't do it just yet, because as I said, we have a fantastic guest joining us right now, the 100th guest. He is a celebrated author, journalist, and has done many fantastic things in the world of motorsport. So we're going to bring him in right now. For the 100th time, we're going to bring in a guest. Please join me in extending a very warm welcome to the brilliant Mr. David Tremayne.
Wow. How does one live up to that?
Well, I mean, you have written about, spoken with more people than I could list on here. And thank you so much for coming on and being our 100th guest, celebrating this milestone with us.
Thank you for having me.
Basically, when I saw you on Facebook, I thought, oh, he'd be a perfect guest, but I don't think he'll say yes. But I thought I'd ask. So thank you so much for coming on. I'm very much looking forward to what we're about to speak about. I never thought I'd be speaking with you, because you've written some fantastic books and you've had an incredible career. So, yeah, thank you for giving up your time this evening. Much appreciated.
Quite approachable at times.
At times. But no, thank you so much for saying yes. Very much looking forward to it. Just going to adjust the camera here. All the questions are flying in already, but we're going to come to those in a minute. Hello, guys, in the comment section. If you have any comments or questions for David, do put them in. We'll see them in real time, and we'll try and work them in. But firstly, David, I know you're busy, but how's everything been these last few weeks in this lovely weather?
Fairly hectic. What are we trying to do? There's 3 books on the go, 2 of which are down to photos and captions. the odd Grand Prix every so often, like every other damn week at the moment.
Yes.
I'm trying to find an airfield where somebody will let me go and play with my car.
Yes.
So far, we've got nowhere with that, but we probably got a Santa Pod. So just chasing at the moment.
Well, I suppose it's good problems to have, isn't it? You know, we've got lots of motorsport and a high-speed car to play with, which obviously we're going to come to very soon.
It's a lot more fun than sitting at home not doing anything, that's for sure.
Yes, exactly. Which, ironically, is how all these videos started. It all began in lockdown, and because all these lovely drivers didn't have anything else to do, so they came and had a chat. But and they've continued to do so. But it's great that you're busy and all is well. So fantastic.
That was an excellent list you had.
It just gets longer.
Proper
All
guy.
these lovely people keep saying yes, and it's incredible because, as I said, this isn't the day job. It's just a thing that I do, and yeah, I've been very fortunate. So I guess we have to start right at the very start, I suppose. When did your interest in the world of motorsport and all things kind of fast and noisy begin?
Well, actually, I was going to say 1963-ish, because the things I loved to begin with were the Maserati 151 and the Aston Martin DP215 that ran at Le Mans. Funnily enough, we are quite close to finishing a book on those Astons for Palawan Press. And I'd just like to say right now that I hope my co-author, Stephen Archer, is recovering from some heart surgery. Knowing Stephen, he's definitely going to be recovering quickly. But actually, it's really funny. I said to my folks once that when I think I was in my three and a half, the first thing I remember in life is Seagrave's Golden Arrow. And if you're familiar with that, it was a super long, beautiful land speed record car that had like panniers between the wheels. And I distinctly remember as a kid just peeping over the top of these panniers, and you could see the screen kind of sloping back, little gun sight on it, everything else. And they were adamant that we'd never seen it. They'd never taken me to Bewley when I was that young, which is where the car lives. Anyway, along comes the internet, and I did some research, and it was at the Schoolboys exhibition in London in 1956, when I would have been, I guess, 3.5.
Wow.
And that's my first conscious memory, which maybe explains a great deal about what happened subsequently. It was quite fitting that it would be the Golden Arrow that kind of kicked it all off.
That's quite a place to start. And I guess if any kind of machine is going to capture the imagination, that something like that is going to be it. I mean, as I mentioned in the notes that we've got here, my first introduction to the land speed record, it was in a book. I can't remember what book it was, and it had various land speed record attempt machines on it, and it was Thrust 2 was the one that I remember, which obviously you're involved with, and we'll come to that. Also gold, so there's something clearly about a gold,
it's funny, isn't it?
sleek looking thing. It catches the eye. Something about gold and being a kid.
The irony there is having a car called Stay Gold, which has actually been red and is now black. But
okay, I didn't realise that it changed colour. I mean, obviously we're going to come on to that because it's astonishing. It's an astonishing machine. But yeah, what a fantastic place to start. I mean, from there, obviously there was always the interest in fast, noisy cars and things like that. And I guess it kind of just stuck with you from then. When did you first kind of go racing? Like to watch, I mean.
My first race that I went to was 68. But the key in between those two kind of periods, if you like, was May the 5th, 1967, when my mum used to work in a wallpaper shop, and the old guy who owned it bought autocar and motor every week, flicked through them, and then gave them to her to give to me. And I remember a picture of this BRM H16 coming through Cops. You remember in those days, the things were, because they were understeering so much, it looked like they were coming straight at you.
Yeah.
And there was this guy called Jackie Stewart driving it. And I thought then, I like these cars. I didn't like the 1.5 litre cars
Right.
because they look quite puny, but this was a proper, a brutal looking race car. And I, from that point on, became A, hooked on BRMs, and B, on Formula One. So the next year,
Wow.
I'm like 14, and a couple of older guys that I knew took me to Brands Hatch for the Race of Champs. And of course, being a BRM fan, I was super cool because Mike Spence had been quickest in the first session and was on the front row with Bruce.
Wow.
And Pedro was racing, and Pedro became my first race driver hero. And Mike ran second, and then I think he'd worn through the sump or through an oil pipe. And Pedro came from the back of the grid, actually after all the other cars had gone, and finished second to Bruce. And he overtook some guy again called Jackie Stewart twice in that race, shaking his hand out the cockpit, which I love reminding Jackie of now. And he always says something, well, Pedro had these crazy eyes. Yeah, but you couldn't see him. All you could see was this fist out of the cockpit waving at this blue car. So that was my first ever race. And I mean, what's really sweet about it is I could say I was at McLaren's first Formula One victory, but also I didn't know that I'd become friends with so many of the guys on the grid. And I mentioned to Jackie X once that I'd seen him there at Brands in my first race, and he said, "Did you watch it from your pram?" Which I said, "Well, I kind of wish I had, but the truth is, I'd given up my pram about 12 years, 13 years earlier."
Just sort of go, yes, Jackie. Yes. Jackie's lovely, isn't he? He's such a nice guy.
He actually gets nicer with age. I remember him telling Nigel Roebuck that when he raced, he thought he was God's gift, and then it was when he kind of stopped that he realised how much he'd relied on all the other people.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and he's still going. He still travels around the world, doing some lovely things. But just go back to that race. I mean, what a era to get you started, and obviously subsequent eras and generations that have passed. So many people of my age and even younger still look back at that era and think, I wish I'd just been able to just
remember those stupid high wings that they had,
the bolted on things.
I actually had a stupid high wing made out of Meccano on the back of my push bike.
Amazing.
On the front, big wing on the back, which regularly fell off just like the real thing.
Yeah, not quite at the same speeds, of course, but I mean, I think you've got it bad when you do that. That's when you know.
Either that, or you run a 1970, I think it was, Tasman series in your head while you're having Sunday lunch. So you're Graham McRae, and then various other people are Neil Allen or whatever, and you go on the basis of who finishes each course first. And when nobody else knows this is happening, otherwise they might have eaten faster. But yeah, it's a bit of a sickness, really, isn't it?
I think that's another flag, isn't it? It's like, oh, I'm not well.
One of the things I think,
great illness.
I think the key thing with the Jackie experience with the BRM, what I couldn't understand was, like when Jim Clark was killed, how angry I got. And I went out on that bike and I just pedaled the hell out of it. And it was only later that I came to realize that although I love cars and I love the shapes and everything else, the thing that really gets to me most is the people that make them or drive them or engineer them or whatever, because it all begins and ends with someone's idea and a human being coming up with all this sort of stuff. And I suppose what really upset me most, because I didn't know Jim Clark from Adam, and I'd only just begun to understand at that time how great he was, and came to understand it even more subsequently after his death. But you kind of think it's just so wrong that you follow someone like that, and then suddenly they stop, but everything else carries on. So it became a kind of crusade, if you like, to not let that happen. But with departed drivers, that you would keep their memories alive by writing about them in articles and maybe writing books about them.
Yeah.
That came much later on, but that was, I kind of figured it out quite recently that was where all that kind of mission, if you like, began.
It was always kind of in there, and you just had to get that out, and you've done so, absolutely fantastically in the books of yours that I've read. And we're going to come on to the books very shortly. I've just seen a few comments in there just regarding some books and research, and we're going to come to that. One from Rob Harbour. Rob, we're going to come to your question very shortly. I just want to say hello to Mike Wilds, who's tuned in. Good evening, Mike. He said,
"Hello again, Mike."
Yes. Apparently, you two spoke earlier, and Mike, you had some kind words, so thank you very much.
And now, Mike, everyone knows what a cool guy you are, if they didn't already know that, which I'm sure most of them did. But
yeah,
thanks for the call.
Yeah, absolutely. And Mike, very, very nice to meet you at Thruxton the other week. Thank you so much. So yeah, Mike Wilds, the legend, is listening in. I think we better be nice. So, I mean, did you ever have any designs on becoming a Formula One racing driver? Was that ever? Because I know that was my dream when I was a kid.
Of course.
We all had it. I mean, that as soon as I asked that question, I thought, didn't need to ask that.
You know what they say? It's a sort of bastardized version of what they say, but those who can do, those who can't teach, write. And I think most
of us just talk about it like me. Yeah, exactly.
Most of us think we were quite quick until, you actually try and do it. And then it's not, we're all opinionated on what people are doing on the track. But I always advocate that you should do it. My business partner, Joe Saywood, Joe didn't drive until he was in his 40s. We had one screamingly funny day interviewing Peter Monteverdi at Paul Ricard in 1990. And I borrowed his husband's Formula Vauxhall Lotus to drive around the track. And I kept saying to Joe, "Here's my hire car. Go and nobody will see you. Just drive around the track." And Joe wouldn't. But I think you should always have a go in something yourself, because then at least you have a vague idea what you're talking about. And if I'd known how much Peter Monteverdi would end up owing me for the press releases I wrote for his team, I'd have clutched that Vauxhall Lotus or stuffed it. But I think it's important that you should, we've all had our aspirations.
Yeah.
I mean, I think I'm quite well suited to what I drive now, which doesn't involve going around corners. It doesn't normally anyway. But it's always a good thing. It's important, because otherwise it just becomes, how can you talk about the line someone takes through a corner, or whether he makes the car understeer when it should be oversteering, if you don't know how that feels?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I've done a bit of go-karting, I've done a couple of track days, and I can drive very quickly, and I know where my limit is. And I think every now and again, I think I could do this. And then I realised that, there's nobody within 10 seconds of me either way. And I'm in a little single-seater, sort of, like farting around Thruxton. And I think if there was other people on the track and a lot more to think about, I'd probably struggle with it. But
this is exciting to be driven.
Yes.
I remember being driven around Silverstone Motion on a Lacey.
That would do.
When you could, there's a Ben Mechanics charity thing, I think. You could choose who drove you around, and everyone wanted to go with Schumacher, and I wanted to go with Jean. And it was the week after he'd lost at Monza and thrown his helmet at the back of the wall in the Ferrari pit, and then driven the hire car straight home to Avignon. So his brother had to take it back to Monza the next day. And I was sat in the car, I had my powerboat helmet on at the time. And I said to Jean, "I want you to drive like you did on the way home from Monza." So he kind of looks like, "Oh, it's you." "Yeah, okay." So we go out of the pits. And as this XJ6 comes round us, driven by Michele Alboreto. So I thought, this is going to be fun. We're in an Alfa Romeo, which is, I think it was De Simone's road car when he was doing touring cars. Anyway, we go down the hangar straight, and Michele pulls over to the right quite obligingly, but Jean then overtakes him on the right even more. So we're half on the grass, half on the track. And then all of a sudden, I'm subliminally aware that there's quite a lot of colour on the screen. on the dash, and then John goes, ah, and he's blown the engine to bits. So we go back to the pits, stick it in a garage, and the car's like, those little models you get with lots of negative camber, look like one of them. And Ken walks past. And he goes, "What I did, look." And he's laughing and pointing at this dead Alpha. And then for all dissimony, it turns out he's chipped it. So he actually ends up paying for the engine rebuild.
Oh, and it was all Jean's fault.
No, you fiddled with it. You've got to pay for it. And then I went out later on with Damon in a Renault 5, something like that. And it was fascinating watching his size 12, 13 feet on the pedals. And just as I'm watching that through cops, big shunt, and Paul Stewart's looped an Escort into the wall with a couple of guys in the back who've cracked their heads together. So we sort of get out and say, how many of us are you seeing? And they say 4. So we kind of set them down, and Silverstone Sid came and rescued them. But I love being with drivers and watching what they do.
Yeah,
it's kind of a sort of I don't know. It's just, you can study their style, ask them how many tenths they're at, see how gentle they are. I've been with Lewis and Jensen when they were both together at McLaren on the top gear track. That was fun. It's just fascinating to watch how they do it, because they are in a different league, people like that.
Absolutely. And I mean, I've obviously not had the privilege of being in the car with any of those guys, but even people like if you go down to Thruxton, you've got Tiff down there, and he's taking people around the lap, 95% of it sideways, and he's just sort of there having fun with it. But just watching him doing what he's doing is incredible.
It's funny, isn't it? Because you can look at some people and you think, well, they're not very quick. And then you get in with them and you think, hell, they are. And the biggest lesson I had was racing karts in Chelsea, I think it was, and Fiona Leggett, who used to...
she's been on here for a chat. She's very good.
She was driving around, and I watched her at Croft in touring cars and thought, God, she's got no idea. And then she just blew my doors off because she was being sensible. You know what guys are like, they've all got to brake super late, blah, blah. And she was just driving so smoothly, braking a bit early, getting on the power and everything else. And you just think, she made you look like a real idiot there. Yeah. And it was another valuable lesson. Like driving with Jackie, but we did a driving day with him, Johnny, and Jonathan Palmer around Alton Park. And Jackie was like 66 at the time, which some of us now know is a baby age, but at the time, it seemed like he was ancient. He was so quick, but he was so smooth and effortless. And then, he taught me so much more about driving position and just being gentle. But if you're braking, mean it. Don't feather it. Just you're either on or off them. And days like that are really interesting. They're very good for you, and we should all have to do them as a refresher course every 5 years. So you get rid of all the bad things you've learned and pick up all the good stuff.
Yeah, you just kind of just to polish things a bit. Just on that note, we've got a guy called Colin Peach who's just put a comment in saying that Tiff waves as he goes past sideways. He does wave. And Colin is a instructor on one of these like race days, experience days that you can do. And I went round in the Porsche Cayman with him, and he was very nice. He's a very nice chap. So even though the instructors like Colin, you just got to watch what they're doing, and they're fantastic. So hopefully Colin will say something nice about me. Who knows? But you mentioned about Damon in the Renault 5. That's just put me in mind of something that was brought to my attention recently. Is it 85, 86? You raced in a Renault 5 turbo.
Yeah, I did.
Race.
There's footage.
Was it Birmingham?
Of me outbraking Ivan Major into the first corner and spinning. And then I managed to repass him.
Fantastic. Because that was...
That's the only car race I've ever done, thanks to John Webb. And it was peeing down. And the funniest thing is, we go through the first corner, which was a left. Then you go through this kink, which is a roundabout. And I nearly backed off because there was a cop standing there. Talk about how ingrained it is. And you're thinking, don't be an idiot. And then we get to the long run down to the roundabout at the end. And everyone's going to the outside. And I just went down the inside of everyone. And then when we came out, there was somebody that I had to lean on. and I heard this, and somebody went spinning off
And
behind.
somebody vanished over
It
the.
was such fun to be a hooligan. And we finished, I think I finished 5th in my bit, and David DaCosta was the owner of the car and the sort of star driver. He was chasing for second in his heat. And I think he hit the wall, but got going. I think we finished 6th or something. And what I didn't realise, I'd forgotten, I think David Leslie won that, who was our super family friend. David's boys, Graham and James, we were with at a wedding over the weekend. They're our kind of 3rd and 4th sons.
Yeah, he's a lovely chap. Obviously, I met him when I was quite young, David, and it's a very sad day when he left us. So
we used to drive home from seeing him, and Trish would say, "Did you know Deal's doing the Can-Am race in Dallas next week?" No, and he wouldn't tell me anything, but he'd tell her all the stuff he was doing.
Amazing. That's quite a thing to keep close to your chest as well. That's a very cool.
Yeah. Oh, well, that's typical David sometimes.
Yeah, lovely stuff. I mean, just want to move on. I mean, we touched on this. We have to. I mean, just like you touched on, your first interest was the land speed record and things like that, and also you've got into it recently. I mean, this probably is a silly question, and I know it actually is a silly question. What drew you to it? Obviously, was it the car? Was it the speed? Was it everything? Was it just the thought of something going faster than ever before? Because I mean, it kind of feels like you really got suckered into it.
Well, actually, apart from the Seagrave thing with Golden Arrow, the real start was the water speed record.
Yeah.
And I was seeing pictures of Campbell's accident on Coniston that, oddly enough, inspired me to want to do something like that.
Right.
Eventually. And about that time, I spent all my pocket money on a book called The Book of the Racing Campbells, which is over behind my head somewhere, by Richard Huff. And that was not quite boy's own style, but it was interesting. It was about all the guys that had gone before, the Frank Lockhart's, Ray Keaches, and Malcolm Campbell's, and all those guys, and John Cobb. This will sound really stupid, but I always used to pretend that, because I was 6 weeks premature, I used to pretend that I'd been rushed to replace John Cobb, who died in 1952. If I'd gone full term, I'd have been a 1953 baby. But I'd always had this sort of thing in the back of my mind that I wanted to be involved in a land speed attempt, and I wanted to do a boat. It was always the boat that fascinated me first.
Yeah.
And then I kind of, I read everything I could find about the land speed record, and it just went on and on. And that was kind of my overriding interest, even more than racing at one stage.
And it's quite interesting that you say that. You got interested in the boats and things like that, because I was interested in that kind of thing. And I was interested because it was so far removed from what I was used to. My mum won't thank me for saying this, but we had an old Viva and a Lada in the 80s. That was my mum's drive around car. But then you got these boats going incredibly quickly on water, high speed stuff. And because it was so far removed from what I knew, I was fascinated by it. Whereas there's some people today say, "Oh, I'm not interested in motorsport or in speed records or whatever," but because I can't relate to it. And I think, but because you can't relate to it, doesn't that make it more fun? And that was always my thought process. I was wondering if that was the same with you.
Yeah, no, I think there's a point in that. I mean, the boats I like I've raced a V-hull, which is like kind of an ordinary boat. That was quite fun, but I prefer hydroplanes, which you sit on 3 points on top of the water. And I had a little 1 litre one that would do about 90 miles an hour. And that actually, if you had the right skid fin on it, would handle like a race car. You could sort of turn it in and slide it. And if you didn't have the right skid fin, it would understeer like a pig. Wow. But that was fast. Well, that was quite fun. And I've done more boat races than I have car races.
Right. I mean, obviously, we lost Mr. Peroni in an accident just off the Isle of Wight in one of those similar kind of boat.
Yeah, that was an offshore boat. I went offshore sometimes with a guy called Steve Curtis, who I think Steve's 6 or 7 time British world champion in those things. Steve is completely insane. He's one of the bravest guys I've ever come across, and just an all-round fantastic guy. And if you didn't know anything about him, he'd never tell you. He would never tell you a single thing about all the races he's won. And
wow.
He's the throttle man for the offshore ones. So he's the guy that's the hard bit. The steering bit's slightly less hard.
Yeah. Wow.
Unless you have Steve Curtis as your throttle man, in which case you'd better keep up.
You've got to have your wits about you.
He taught me how to drive a V-hull. And at the time, that was like having race driving lessons from Michael. It was like you couldn't get any better.
He was the man.
Yeah.
Fantastic. I do love powerboats. Excellent.
It's still got, there's something about going fast on water that's always giving me the chills.
Yeah. Even from the outside, I mean, you can see a car going fast, but without a point of reference, it's hard to sometimes gauge the speed of things. But with the boats, no matter what they're doing, no matter where they are, because obviously the offshore ones, it just looks absolutely brilliant / insane. It depending on where your brain falls. I always think it looks absolutely incredible. The speed and I don't know, just bouncing around, and it just looks.
We bought a jet engine in 1984 to put in a boat, and I didn't have the smarts to find the funding, and that kind of died the death. And then I sold the engine to a guy from Pink Floyd, to Dave Gilmore, to put in his Nat, and it was still a serviceable engine. And then I bought a big hydroplane that was 22 foot long, and Tom Walkinshaw built an engine for us. And then the marriage process of that didn't quite work. And Russell Spence, my good friend Russell Spence, helped us with the finance on that. And then that was another of our unsuccessful projects. And then we had a third one lined up, which was to drive an unlimited hydroplane to go after the propeller record. And I remember going to Canada to look at a boat in 2000, went to the race, and Saywood says, that record you want to beat, some bloke's broken it. And there was a guy called Russ Wicks, who I hated for at least a day. And then I had breakfast with him the Tuesday after the race. And we became such good mates. We're still super close now.
Lovely.
And he did the mile record in this boat, which is owned by another mate called Ken Patel over in Seattle. And the deal we had set up there was that we'd lease the boat and do the kilometer record. And again, we fell over on the funding, which is why with Stay Gold, we better succeed, because otherwise it's all just been a litany of failures.
Yeah, sure.
But it's only a failure if you stop and give up. If you keep pushing.
Then, you just got to, you got
to. The unlimited hydroplanes, I adore watching them because they're so quick.
Yeah, incredible things.
200 mile an hour kind of boats, 40 foot long.
Yeah. Just two guys you actually mentioned there. A guy called Simon Steele put a couple of questions or comments in just at the start of the chat. He says, what do you remember of Tom Walkinshaw, obviously much missed, and of Russell Spence? He's actually mentioned both of them, and you mentioned that you're still pounding. I mean, my memory of Russell Spence, he was being in the car in the crane in Birmingham.
Yes. Well, when I first met Spence, he was at Donington. I didn't meet him. I watched him in the Redgate Lodge because he was coming into F3 for the British Grand Prix. This would be in 81, I think. And I watched him pour a pint of beer over some guy's head. And I thought, geez, you want to steer clear of that guy. How stupid can you be? Because Russ and his dad, Bob, were two of the kindest, sweetest guys I ever met. And Russ helped both my kids, Tom and Sam, with their karting initially, and helped Tom to do some Palmer Audi. Russell is just, for me, salt of the earth. And Tom, I often wonder why Tom didn't smack me, because you remember that time at Donington when they lost the race because of a pit stop snafu?
Yeah.
And Tom blamed us, so we had a big motoring news headline, media's fault, says Tom. That went down well. And then there was something else. But we bumped into each other a few times. And when I had that big hydro, I needed a motor. And I remember walking up the twiddly bit on the outside of the tunnel at Monaco that leads to the car park up on the hill above the paddock. And there was Tom. And I plucked up all the courage I had and thought, well, he can only say yes or no. And I said, I've got this boat. I want to do the UK propeller record. Is there any chance that you could supply an engine? I haven't got any money, and instead of saying get lost, he just said, I think we could do that, DT. And he never, ever let me down. If anyone let it down, it was me not finding the funding. And in the end, what was going to be a 7-litre V12 became their 3.5-litre Metro-based engine, supercharged. So we had about a 900 horsepower engine that wasn't going to cost us anything.
Wow.
And unfortunately, the mating process, we just couldn't raise the funding. But Tom, I love Tom. He never let me down on anything. I know a lot of other people didn't have time for him, but I thought the guy was aces.
Yeah, proper stand-up guy. Just
I just believe us. Funnily enough, I said this to Mike earlier on when he phoned. Just speak as you find. And I found both Russell and Tom I would classify as being close friends.
Lovely.
It was funny not funny, but when we went to the cathedral for Tom's funeral, I remember Derek Warwick and I sat together, and there was this picture of Tom up in the front, a lovely picture, but a real kind of grimace. And after, you sit there and you think, will you stop looking at me like that? Martin Brundle got up and made a speech, and he was telling us, I forget what the exact story he said. Derek's, of course, was causing all 3 Jags to crash on the first corner in Spain. But Martin's story was about something he'd done to piss Tom off. And he said he was about 10 degrees cooler than he is in that photo. Yeah, you wouldn't want to be on the wrong side of him.
No, I'm sure. Well, I love that line. How are you still looking at me like that? Brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. Something I just want to touch on. Obviously, we know you've written books about the land speed record, things like that. I mentioned earlier on Thrust 2, beautiful, fabulous machine. Everyone talks about the Bluebird, and rightly so, but Thrust 2, fantastic. You were involved in that kind of team. How did you get involved with that? Because
I just turned up on Noble's doorstep one time and said, this was in 1977, and I said, I want to write about your thing. Actually, I'll tell you what it was. That's not strictly true. It was the first day, October the 3rd, 77, was when I started work as a journalist. And I met a mate called Martin Preston that day, and we're still mates to this day. And we went to see Richard selling Thrust at Motor Fair. And he was banging on, hair slicked back and his stripy shirts and all that city gent type stuff. And I think he had the chassis there and nothing else. And the film The Fastest Man on Earth, which played over and over, so you became word perfect on it. And he was going around with a bucket saying, thank you so much for your contribution and all this. And my mate Martin goes, but I haven't given you anything. And that's when I first met Richard, who is also a very good friend still. And then I went to interview him a month later. And that was actually the first thing I think I wrote for Motoring News.
Right.
And I just attached myself.
You just clung on.
Basically, I wasn't going to go away. And then I went out to cover it in 81 for Motoring News. And I went out again. So they got a 2-page centre spread on it. Then went out in 82. And that time I got 4 pages. But it wasn't an overly happy experience because Richard was not great with the media then. So I took some copies around to his house, told him his PR was complete crap. And then he said, typical Richard, he just said, Yeah, Sally and I have been talking about that. How would you feel about running the media side of it in '83? He's very
Wow.
good at sort of whipping the wind out of your sails by being smart. So I ran the PR side of that in '83 and was out there for the third time. And then I had the most stupid publisher I was talking about angle of incidence on the car, and he kept saying that's not something we've heard in chemistry. My wife's a chemist, and she's never heard of that. So I said, well, it's physics. That's probably why. And then I was talking about the rooster tail of salt this thing threw up. And they kept changing it to chicken tail. Look, you can make yourself look stupid, but you're not making me look stupid in a book.
Yeah.
So we didn't go ahead with that. And then Trish and I raised half the money, and overnight Richard raised the other. So we raised $6,000 to publish the book I'd written with by Project Thrust.
Wow.
So that was fun because
I
that
bet.
was a story I was absolutely determined was going to get told.
Yeah,
Yeah,
sure.
British land speed record, first time since the 60s. Yeah, we weren't going to let that one go by. And then
No, absolutely.
we've sort of pretty much been mates ever since. But
That's
that's how the Thrust 2 thing came about, and I still love that car.
Yeah. Oh, it's a fabulous car. I was looking at it. I didn't realize all like the speeds that it got to. And the fastest run was 650.88 miles an hour.
That was the peak speed.
That's the peak speed. That is ridiculous.
The fastest was 642, I think. But at that speed, it was almost ready to fly. But that was just a fun project to be involved with.
Absolutely astonishing.
I remember we were watching a soft porn movie on the desert one night, a whole bunch of us in a caravan. And then we suddenly realized it was blowing a hell of a gale outside and the whole camp was being destroyed. And we ended up with the marquee tent being chained to the car and all the big end, the starter motors, everything else was tied to them. And the next day, the place looked like a wreck.
Wow.
If you ever get a chance, anyone who's listening, if you get a chance to go to Bonneville, to the Salt Flats, take it, because it's something else. It's such an exciting place.
It feels like one of those places that you have to visit.
Yeah, it is. It's a bit like one of my places I need to go is the Isle of Man. I'd like to go there. It's like Monaco, Isle of Man, Bonneville, whatever.
Yeah, definitely. I think so. I mean, yeah, it's like that bucket list thing, isn't it? I mean, mine was always the Indy 500, Daytona 500, Bathurst, things like that. Pikes Peak, I'd love to do Pikes Peak. And yeah, you saying about Bonneville, Salt Flats.
Spooky. Gary Connolly, who's one of the F1 stewards, because of the FIA Land Speed Commission, we've had 2 trips out there to Bonneville to show that we're not a bunch of blazer idiots like they used to be. And they were all kind of, if you like, racers. And I was in the middle of the desert. Gary's got a picture of me, man in black on the desert. So DT being contemplative. And I was just there, floods of tears, thinking, this is humanity. We're this big.
Yeah.
Place is full of spirits of guys who've been and gone.
Yeah.
Out there. It's just the most spiritual place on earth.
Kind of makes you aware of the bigger picture in the world. And yeah. Wow. I mean, actually, I've just seen a question that's come in from like Carol Mason, which on YouTube. Hello,
Carol.
Which we're going to come to soon. And this is probably a good time to go on to, I mean, I was going to wait to the end, but we'll bring it forward. Your own British land speed record attempt with Stay Gold. How do you get people together to get involved with something like that? Because, and I don't mean this to come out the wrong way, land speed records, they don't get the coverage or the gravitas that they did back in 60s, 70s, 80s with the Americans doing it and everything else like that. Is it an easy sell to people?
No.
To get people involved? I mean, I imagine not.
But what's really funny about it, and I still kind of struggle to process it if I'm honest, but basically when our propeller hydroplane thing fell apart in Seattle, which was really kind of annoying. If Tony Fernandez bless him, had come along 2 or 3 years earlier, we'd have probably got that job done.
Yeah.
But my best friend who worked in Formula One in 2008, she left. She went back home she went to Dubai, actually, that's right. But I was just sitting on the couch moping one time, and then I thought, bollocks, I'm going to get a rocket car and go and do a tour of drag strips in the Middle East.
As one would.
Because I had driven a rocket car once before. And then I talked to this fantastic kid called Daniel Jubb, who had a handlebar moustache. He was about 20 and did the rocket motors or was working on them for Bloodhound. I ran this idea by him and he sort of said, hydrogen peroxide bombs, Middle East, quick as a flash. I said, that's not going to work, is it? Been super quick on the uptake. So he said, no. So I thought, okay. So I started looking for a jet car. And all the jet cars that were for sale were like $40,000, and I had zilch. And then I see this advert about a 235 mile an hour race car, too slow for driver, was the headline. And it was this big pink dragster with a jet engine in it, which Ian Casely was selling down in Bristol. Long story short, I bought that. And then I got Andrew Hurdle, who used to race at Santa Pod in a jet car called Scorpion. And I knew Andrew because he helped me buy that first jet engine. I found him on LinkedIn, and then he brought Kieran Westman in. So that's how I got two guys to help. And then Andrew got us into Kemble, Cotswold Airport, where we had a hangar for a long time. They were super kind to us. But there's something about, jet car is quite interesting to look at out of context. And people just would come along and say, I want to help. But the biggest step was when we couldn't get the engine running. And Bill Smith, who raised Bluebird from Coniston, so Campbell's boat, he's only up the road from us
I see. Okay.
In North Shields. And I knew Bill, but I didn't really like him, to be honest, which we both laugh about because he says his wife felt the same. But I went to see Bill one day, and about Bluebird, and he just says, I know what's wrong with your engine. And everyone told me that, and I lost count of how many people knew what we weren't doing right, blah, blah. And then he did find what was wrong. And then it went on from there. And, Bill is our crew engineering chief. And I trust Bill with my life. And Bill is in the same category to me as Russell Spence or Tom Walkinshaw. Without him, we'd have never got gold running enough to do the speeds we did the last time with it. And certainly he and his crew rebuilt it this time. So he's got people who've worked on Bluebird restoring that, have been working on gold with us. There's some fantastic guys in the thing, all giving their time for nothing. None of us get paid, but it's incredibly humbling because you think, why are they doing it?
Yeah.
Why are they doing it for me? Why do they want to do this so much? And of course, they all want to do it safely. I totally get that.
This is paramount, yeah.
It's a funny situation because you feel very differently when you're driving something like that than if you were watching. I wouldn't want to watch my son Tom driving it. Not after what happened the last time. I wouldn't want to see someone I love driving that, but I don't mind driving it myself, which is kind of odd situation. But
a control thing, isn't it? It's something's out with your control.
Yes, I think so. And the funny thing is, I've done this 1,000 times with people like join their dream, like I did with Richard, and then Diesel Max and all those kind of things. And you get behind young Brits that are coming up, and you give them a load of good publicity to try and help them on their way, because that's what you do. That's half the fun of the job that you do. But it's really weird when someone's helping you, because you kind of think, well, why? Why are you doing it? And it's great. It's fantastic. And without it, we'd be nowhere.
Yeah.
But it is an interesting sort of juxtaposition, if you like.
Yeah.
And that's how you do it, because good people who want to help you come along, like Tony Pennell, who used to run Jaguar, was my first sponsor. So I didn't have any money. So Tony Pennell gives, he'll pledge £5,000. Martin Whitmarsh, I'm doing a book for McLaren. And I phoned him and said, is there any chance I could have all of it up front instead of half and half? And he took 3 seconds to say yes. And then,
Wow.
of course, being Whitmarsh, said, what are the chances you won't have killed yourself before we get our book? It was quite funny. But, people like that, Jesus, without them, we'd be nowhere.
Yeah.
And it still stuns me that people could be that kind, because from being, I'd love to get that car, but I haven't got any money, I suddenly got the budget.
And you can go ahead and you can do
Then
it.
it goes the price goes up £5,000.
Yeah.
So I kick a few things around the house and break a few things. And then my kids, one of them's with me sort of saying, grow up. And the other one is then on the phone saying, right, this is how it's going to be. We're going to give you £2,500 each.
Wow.
And I'm saying, no, that's not how parenting works. And they say, it is. And then a little light goes on in your head and think, okay. So we had a jet car. Instead of a dog, we had a jet car.
I mean, it's
Doesn't eat as much as a dog.
a fairly acceptable substitute, I think.
Yeah, it wasn't bad.
But it always comes back to people, doesn't it? People
does.
make
And with all these people, I love these people to bits because they're our crew. But privately, you think they're mine. They're my mates because they want to do this. And it's,
yeah,
like I said,
they're all in it with you.
it's my best friend Nadia says a good humbling does everyone a lot of good, and she's absolutely right. And that's a very humbling situation to be in. It's also exhilarating because when
Yes.
you do something, you've all done it.
Yeah, yeah, and if it's that sort of team, that collective, that group,
Yeah.
which is,
And you look at all these Formula One teams, and it kind of helps you to understand why there's such massive camaraderie in big teams,
yeah,
and how people all get behind the wheel and start pushing it, sort of thing.
and it's why there's always the thanks to the crew, thanks to the team, thanks to.
Yeah, I know. Oh God, to
can't do it.
listen to that, and you think, well, yeah, I get why it sounds
Corny,
trite or whatever, but it isn't. It's absolutely not, because without all that effort, you don't go anywhere.
Yeah, and until you've been in the situation where you've got those people pulling for you, perhaps don't understand it.
And it's also the kind of living the dream thing. I remember when Lewis won his first Grand Prix in Canada, and he talked about living the dream. A load of journalists go, oh, for God's sake, that's exactly what he's doing, you jerks. Why don't you get a dream?
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah. I mean,
it's too hard. You'd have to do something then.
yeah, you have to get off your backside and work for something, make something happen.
And to see that, I love seeing drivers when they win their first races. And I did an interview with Pierre Gasly because of COVID. I wasn't at the race. He won at Monza, but I loved that way he just sat on the podium, and you can imagine Antoine Hubert and all those things going through his head.
Yeah.
And there's a thing on the Players Tribune that I recommend anyone listening to download called So You Want to Know the Real Pierre Gasly. And it's all about him growing up with Hubert and how they were two young boys who dreamed of going Formula One, and how everyone laughed at them. And now look where Pierre is.
Yeah, and there's that lovely picture. He's sitting on the podium, and he's not jubilant. It's all calmed down. He's just sitting there with his head
processing.
Down, with the trophy next to him, and you can just tell he's just processing all the people that he's met, all the people that have been with him, people that he's lost, of course. And
that was fantastic. I loved that. It's funny because then I saw him at Silverstone the following year, and just that story he wrote was the best bit of journalism in F1 this year, because it just came from the heart.
Yeah. And I've just seen that Simon Steele, hello Simon, he's just put the link to the Players Tribune in the comments, so do have a look at that.
Yeah, thank you for doing that. There's a lot of good stuff on there, actually, by various sports people. I love that frankness when they tell it like it is.
Yeah, absolutely. So do go and have a look at that, but not till we're finished, folks. Thank you. We're going to come back to your very shortly. I'm going to come back with a question in a moment. What happened last time? We've got to bring it up. The accident that you had.
Don't be shy.
Excuse me. Where was the airfield? I can't remember.
Elvington.
That's the one. Thank you. Yes.
Elvington.
Mental blank. Obviously, you're doing about you've got it and everything's going well. I've seen the onboard footage. I've seen bits and pieces and things. Fabulous noise when the thing winds up. It's absolutely incredible noise. It feels a bit easy to say what happened, but I mean, what was going through your mind when it did go wrong? Because
I'll tell you exactly what I thought, because the first time I hurt myself in that car, I just lowered myself down into the seat and landed on the seatbelt buckle very early in the ownership, right in the coccyx. Geez, that really hurt. And I remember saying, I hope that's the worst you ever do. Well, when it kind of, the shoe went out and it was great for like a nanosecond when you feel it slowing, and then suddenly you're sideways. And there's a series of pics that are really good, that my earliest supporter, Phil Evans, who's a fantastic guy that runs the Speed Record Club, I tried to reward his loyalty over whatever it was, 20 odd years, by running him over at Elvington, because at one stage Gold was going straight towards him and he was still clicking away. But I remember thinking, I never expected you would do this, because suddenly we're well sideways. But one of his pictures captures us with full opposite lock, with none of the wheels touching the ground. And you think it's a bit pointless, really.
Thinking, why am I doing this? But it's a natural reaction, isn't it?
It was interesting. Wasn't scary in the slightest, but it was on its side scraping and putting loads of sparks.
Yeah.
And I remember telling Adrian Reynard about that once. He said, "Oh, you shouldn't worry about that. The flash point of jet fuel is way lower than petrol, or high, or whatever." So I said, "Well, thanks for that. I'll remember that the next time." But it was interesting because you didn't have time to be scared. I was annoyed because I kept banging my head on either side of the roll hoop. So it's kind of just like this. And then when I got out, I'd skin that knuckle, and that was it. Squidge the old crown jewels a little bit. And then I'm trying to get out and catching the hand system on the underside of the roll hoop, which we've now stopped that happening. And James Bean, our project photographer, was there. And I said, "What the hell are you doing there?" And he goes, "Try to stay alive." Because he'd also, the two photographers had been kind of in the crosshairs for a minute.
Right, because, going towards it. Wow.
And then I got out and looked at the car and I thought, just keep your trap shut. But my immediate thought was, bloody hell, it's not really badly damaged. I thought it was wrecked from the noise and everything else it made.
It was going to be in bits.
And I thought, well, no, we'll fix this. And that's what we've done.
I love the first thought was we can fix this and go again. That's fantastic.
Yeah, it was interesting because you look and you think, well, I am not dead, so that's okay. We haven't even wrecked the car. And I phoned my missus, bless her. She's not really into all this.
Yeah, same.
I said, I've had a bit of a show, but everything's fine. And now you've got to ask me my speeds. So I bored her with that. And I thought she was super brave when she said, well, if you never do it again, at least you've got that. Wow. My immediate thought was, that's not anything like enough.
You're like, nope.
Not enough. But, we'll see whether it's enough when we next run, which we should be running in July and then having another attempt in August, I think, the way things are at the moment.
Fantastic. Looking forward to
we seem to go in 6-year cycles with this project, which is
2017, wasn't it, the accident?
Yeah, and we'd run previously in 2012 and then had engine problems. Well, we're all volunteers and we will do other jobs. And if you looked at each year how much time you spent on a car, probably adds up to a month each year.
Wow. So impressive alongside everything else. Yeah.
And if we stop, we fail. But if we keep going, maybe we won't.
Yeah, you can still have that shot. Which does bring me on to Carol's question. She has full confidence in you. She says, once you've broken the land speed record, not if, once you've done it, is there any chance you'll finally then go on to have a crack at the water record?
I doubt it. I doubt it. I mean, even I'm not that stupid, but I think I'm far too old to do that, and it is actually quite a dangerous one.
Yeah.
And I think the time to have done that would have been in my 30s, but I wasn't smart enough.
Is there something inside you going, or maybe?
No, but it's quite funny because this thing, this little toy here
Oh, yep.
is
Yep.
Hustler. And as you can see, it's without question the best looking boat that's ever been built.
That is,
And
that's like Thunderbird stuff, isn't it?
my
That's
other massive hero, apart from Donald Campbell, was ironically the guy that took his record away 6 months after he was killed. Lee Taylor, the guy that drove that. Very long story short, but that boat went missing for ages. And I'd met Bruce McCaw because he managed Lee's career in his subsequent rocket boat thing. And Bruce is part of the Hydroplane and Raceboat Museum in Seattle, run by my friend Ken Muscatel and David Williams. Anyway, Danny Thompson, who's Mickey Thompson's son and a land speed record breaker, and is known as the Fast DT in our family. Danny was pictured recently sitting on Hustler. So anyway, I managed to put him and the people who owned it together with Bruce. And Bruce now has Hustler back in Seattle, ready for restoration, which is a massive story. And I feel childishly delighted about the whole thing.
that's fantastic.
And I think one of my mates said recently, wouldn't it be cool if you could actually get K7, the Bluebird, and Hustler alongside each other one day?
Wow,
that would be fun.
That would be top.
Demo runs. That I'm almost certain it'll never happen because of politics and everything else. But that would be so cool, and it would be fun. I sat in that boat back in 1986 on my way home from the Mexican Grand Prix, which was the first proper Grand Prix I covered. So it'd be nice to be reunited with it. But I don't know about water speed records, but there is a little plan somewhere in the Tremayne family, which was before the boys had their kids. So the wives might have something to say about it, but I would like to drive something fast at Bonneville.
Oh, yeah, that would be
200 mile an hour
wouldn't it?
thing at Bonneville would be fun. And Mike Cook, who runs a very good, not Speed Week itself, but another similar thing, has always said he'd find us a car. And I just think that would be super fun.
Yeah, God, wouldn't it just? Definitely a big tick on the list. That would be run a car at Bonneville. Just before we move on, because I know there's a lot of people want to know about F1 books and stuff. Carl Jones, hello, Carl. Very nice to meet you. Thank you for the passes for Thruxton recently. Thank you very much. Lovely to meet you. He's just put a comment saying that that you wrote a very fitting tribute to Craig Breedlove recently.
Yeah, excellent, man.
Which is, pretty cool. I've actually not read that, but I will certainly dig it out. But he was obviously like a record
holder. Man on earth.
Sorry?
The coolest man on earth.
Is he really?
No question. He still is. Nobody has risen to replace him in the coolness stakes yet.
Fantastic. Definitely want to give that a read now. But he's obviously like a record holder, like a land speed record holder, race car driver, and from what I understand and from what you said, quite a chap, which is
lived a good life, that one.
Yeah, which is all you can ask, isn't it? You got to, we're here for a good time, not a long time, as they say.
There's a woman called Landspeed Louise who's a good friend, and her thing is something about it's not about dying looking perfect and young and everything else. It's like sliding sideways into your grave with the brakes smoking and every last bit used up. Or it reminds me of John Button, I love John Button very much.
Yeah,
he's a good friend, and his chauffeur at John's memorial got up and said he'd been to the docks, and the doc said, what's your fitness like? Do you do exercise? And John said, well, I walk to the pub every so often. And then the guy said, well, look, you should really give up smoking and drinking. So John, okay. And then he gets in the car, and the chauffeur said, so what did he say? And John relates all this. So the chauffeur says, where do you want to go? And he said, let's just stop at the off license and the tobacconist on the way home. And that's what it was John. He just lived his life like Ian Young, the journalist. They both live their lives flat out.
Yeah.
And when they went, they went.
Yeah. If you're only here once, make it count.
Yeah.
Yeah, fantastic. Oh, and Mike Wiles, hello again, Mike. Just put a comment in. He said that he'd love to come and see you when you run your jet car, David. So,
Yeah. Well, I'll let everyone know. I'll put something on Facebook when we know what dates we've got.
yeah, fantastic. And if there's room for another
I
one,
have some mates up there.
yeah, if there's room for another one, I'm going to put my hand up. I'm sure on my way in. We've got to obviously get on to
Formula One. Yep. Who wants to know
your
what?
career in journalism and the books and Formula One, things like. I mean, people don't know you actually held a number of jobs within Formula One for a number of teams. You know, like Lotus and Sauber and Caterham and things like that. I mean, how has all that come about? Because I mean, you've obviously got the passion, and you've put yourself in a situation where you're known as well. So,
Well, I don't know quite how these things come about. I actually did. I'm trying to think what I did first. I did the Onyx stuff in 1990. So I did basically, they want the PR press release after each session as soon as possible. So I used to do that. And then we all got through to about Hungary, I think. We all said, how long are you going to do this for? Because the money wasn't coming through. And I asked Joe Chamberlain, Paul Rickard, when are you going to pay me? And he said, yeah, you'll get paid. We're not screwing the little guys yet, which I thought was interesting. And then I did a carnet at Silverstone for each of the Onyx Formula One cars where they were worth, I think it was 25 grand each. And then I got paid up to that, and I knew I wouldn't get paid beyond that. So we decided to go up until JJ quit, and JJ Leto quit at Hungary. And then we all put in our claims for money. And then Peter Monteverdi, it was like watching qualifying. Then Peter Monteverdi qualifies on pole as the guy who's owned the most money, because each of the cars which haven't qualified for races have miraculously matured from being worth 25 grand each to being worth 250 grand each.
Astonishing.
So that ended quite badly. But then
Yeah.
Peter Collins, who is a really good mate, Peter took over Lotus in 91, and that was when he had the red steering wheels and the green leather cockpit and all that from the Jimmy Clark era.
Yeah.
And then in 92, they needed somebody to do their stuff. So I did that from 92 to 94 when the team folded. And then in 97, Max Felty invited me to do Sauber stuff. And I loved working for Sauber. Again, doing the press releases. And the deal was, if we can't win races, we're damn well going to be the first ones to get the press release out. So I did that until 2004, when they became, or was it 5, when they became BMW.
Right.
So by then they didn't need me. And then I did a one-off race for Tyrrell and a one-off for Ligier, I think, doing press releases as well. It's fun. I mean, I loved it at Sauber because you got to work very closely with a good team. To begin with, it took about 6 months before every time you said good morning, they'd look at you as if to say, what do you want? Then, it all became much more integrated, and it was a lovely bunch of people. And I do like to think that we managed to sort of put across the human side of Sauber, because most people didn't go near it because they thought they were all miserable.
Yes.
And they weren't. And Peter Sauber was a lovely guy, and one of the most honest people I've ever had the privilege of working for. Lovely. It was just fun. And you get to know, like, Felipe Massa, probably the last driver I think of as being a mate. The last of them that was a mate, let's put it that way. Because, you don't really get friendly with the drivers in the way that you might have in Formula 3 or the old days.
No, of course.
You still have good relationships with them, but it's not like your buddies.
Yeah, sure. So
but, working with them and doing Paddock Club stuff and everything else, that was fun. Yeah, it was lovely to be, you could go and plant yourself in the team. And, there was one time in 2001 when there was all this laughter outside the bus and the awning was up, so I couldn't see who it was. And at that time, you didn't associate Sauber with laughter. I went
Sure.
down, there was Kimmy, Peter Collins, and Kimmy's ex-karting mechanic. And Peter had discovered Kimmy in karts. And they were just laughing their heads off. And I'd never seen Kimmy like that because he was just relaxed and with mates.
And his guard was down. He was just.
Yeah, he was just having fun with people he trusted.
Oh,
And you could, being on the inside of a team, you kind of saw things like that.
yeah.
And it's like when Kimmy was going to test the first time, I think it was at Mugello in 2001 after Monza. And I remember sitting down with David Robertson, who was his manager, and saying, the way you answer this question will decide whether I ever trust you. Where will Kimmy be next Thursday? Oh, in bed, blah, blah, blah. That's David. I know where he's going to be. I said, how do you know that? Says, because I work for the team. I'm not going to write it because I work for the team. I just see how much you're prepared to tell me the truth and how much you're not.
You're prepared to fluff.
But then, of course, you phone the team on Thursday night and say, well, and they all went, bloody hell, this kid's quick. And apparently Michael had seen him running and said, who the hell's driving that? Just like Mansell did the time when Johnny tested the Benetton in 87.
Yeah, saying who is this? Yeah.
Who on earth was driving that? Like, it certainly wasn't the regular drivers kind of thing.
Because it was like Kimmy's F1 debut, it was in like his 28th race or something ever, wasn't it?
I don't think it was even that. It was something ridiculously small because it was
17 or something. It was
on Formula Renault, and that was it.
Yeah, and he'd gone straight through it. Yeah.
And he was on probation, wasn't he, with his super license and everything? So
yeah. Amazing. I mean, that actually leads us back to a guy you mentioned before, a fellow Finn, Mr. JJ Lato. I mentioned that there's like Rob Hardboard. Hi, Rob had put a comment in. It's probably a good time to ask it. He said, "A Little Bit of Magic is a brilliant book about champion racing." Agreed. As a fan of JJ Lato and Johnny Herbert, what was it like getting all the info about the team? And the American Le Mans Series wins in Le Mans in 2005. Was that fun? Was it a fun process getting all the info about it, or was it tricky?
Well, I owe that book to a lovely lady called Kay Wilson, and Kay managed Marino Franchitti, and we kind of got friendly at one of those Chelsea kart races they used to do at the end of the season, and she put me up for it. And Dave Mirage. I mean, I knew nothing about Dave, and I'm thinking Mirage, and it's obviously Maraj, was just a wonderful guy. So we flew over to Miami to meet him. We did that twice, and on one of those, Sterling and Susie were in the plane as well. And I spent most of the flight in the bar with Susie Moss, just having just a wonderful time. So I always remember this whole project with great affection. Dave Mirage only knew one way to do things, and that was properly. And Kay kept suggesting, talk to this guy. Well, I knew JJ and I knew Johnny really well, and Derek Bell and all sorts of people. And it was Pirro. It was fantastic fun because I met his sons. We talked it all through. We interviewed. Dave was a very good interview. But there's just so many people, and it was such a lovely project. It was one of my favorite book projects. And I'd always said to him that I thought we should do it with David Bull Publishing. And he said, oh, that's funny because that's who I was going to suggest. So the synergies were great.
Wow.
And it was just a fabulous thing to do. And I was really happy with the outcome of the book. What a super team. And then Dave unfortunately died a few years ago. I don't think anyone's really quite sure how. But, there's people you meet in life that you never forget.
Yeah.
And he's certainly one of them. Just an absolute gentleman and I've written a book about all my failures, which needs a success with Stay Gold before it can get published. But there's stuff in there, sort of Dave Mirage's philosophy of life features in it just because he was such a focused, gentle, and honourable man. And it was a brilliant project to work on. It was a pleasure and a privilege to work with people like that. Same as the JCB Dieselmax team that was embedded to write the book right from day one on that. So we're all part of the team. And you had Andy Green and John Piper, all sorts of good people like that. And Brian Horner, Christian's uncle, his team built it. When you can work with people like that, it's brilliant.
It's lovely. Yeah, there's that fondness in your voice for the whole time, and that's fantastic to hear. I mean, and I'm sure
it's quite funny, because you kind of look at it and think, "Shit, did I do that? Did I write all that?" You wonder where you got the time.
Yeah,
and that's when you realise how old you are. When you suddenly sort of think, "My God,
you think
this is a bit scary."
when did that happen? Yeah.
2006.
Wow. See, I can't get my head around that 2006 was 17 years ago. I refuse to believe it. But yeah, no, that's fantastic. What a lovely time. But when you've talked about books and articles and things like that, and I want to come to the subject of like journalism in general, because obviously, you've done plenty of that in your time. As I said, I'm not a journalist. I'm just a guy. I've just got this page, and I try and write it in an impartial way, and I write it based on facts or facts that I am aware of, things like that. There's a lot of sensationalism, isn't there? You need a catchy headline, probably a misleading one. Lots of all kinds of nonsense going on in the journalistic world. Not everywhere, but I mean, just from my personal opinion, I think there's a lot of dumbing down of subjects and a lot of sensationalism and things. Do you feel that it's kind of shifted that way, in just because there's so many outlets out there, and you've got to kind of have some kind of sensationalism to get people involved or to get people tuning into something?
Well, it's funny because I remember a long time ago when my dear friend Mr. Edmund Jordan was describing me as being an effing editor of an effing tabloid, blah blah blah. And that's a good way to light your fire. But I measured Motoring News once and looked up the exact definition of tabloid. And I was amazed because I always thought it was like broadsheet size, but it wasn't. It was tabloid size. But the one thing we were never going to have when I was running that is tabloid journalism. And I still detest all that kind of stuff. I don't like woke. I don't like tabloid stuff. I don't like sensationalism. I mean, one of the things I was most proud of was Motoring News, how we dealt with Ayrton and Roland and their deaths.
Yeah.
Autosport had death at Imola all over the page, and there isn't an animal on earth that doesn't know that.
Yeah.
Just had the guys' portraits and their dates of birth and death.
Yeah.
I don't like sensationalism, and that's definitely something encouraged by the internet.
Yeah, agreed.
One of the things I've been banging on about, there's two things I bore people, well, several things, but two I really bore people with. One is I wanted the FIA to have like a kite mark. So they would say, this website is FIA recommended or whatever. So that people who go online, if it was a pucker Formula One thing that didn't just steal everyone else's stuff and regurgitate it, it could apply to have this little kite mark.
Right.
And they're scared stupid that people might sue them if they don't give it to them. And you think, well, if you don't give it to them, it's because they don't deserve it, or they can't prove that they're not at races. They don't go to the races. They just steal other people's work and rejig it.
Yeah.
I would like to see something like that, purely because it would give people at least some feel for whether they can trust what's there. And all this Ferrari, Lewis to Ferrari garbage that's been going round. That's just a story that somebody made up to fill an empty page. And I don't like that kind of stuff. Speculation is all right, but if it's informed, but that was just made up nonsense.
I mean, you can have facts and blow it up and make it sensationalist again, which I'm not a fan of. But as you say, I mean, there's certain outlets out there I'm not going to name any, where they just, as you say, they just blurt something out, come up with something as a what if. People latch onto it and run with it, and it becomes this huge thing. And you think there's nothing to this. It's very obviously there's nothing to this, but so many get involved and engage with it, and you think this is ridiculous. Why are you just making stuff up? You know,
Well, probably a hopeless Fleet Street journalist, let's say. Although I did do the indie for I can't remember how many years now, and I loved doing that. But my way of looking at it would be if I'd written something, could I, suppose particularly if it's someone who's no longer with us, but could you look their family in the eye with what you've written?
Mm-hmm.
Or, general things. If I wrote something about Lewis that was nasty, could I look Anthony in the eye? And to a lot of people, that doesn't matter. To me, it does.
Yeah.
If I've got a criticism of Lewis and it's fair, then I would feel comfortable writing it. And I might disagree. Like Ayrton and I disagree about loads of things because I didn't like the way he drove. I didn't like the way he pushed people off the track. And I told him that. And I didn't think with his incredible skill he needed to do that. But equally, I could look him in the eye because I believed what I was writing. We had a few high noon things like in the paddock where you meet face to face, but that was all part of the game. But I don't like sensationalism for its sake. I don't like made up stories. And Joe doesn't. And with Grand Prix Plus, that's just not us. But it was funny the other day because I think I might be fairly well known for my obituaries being quite long. I think the record was Carlos Reutemann was 15 pages of GP Plus. But to me, when you've got a monthly magazine that has a paragraph on somebody like Nicky Lauda, you think that's just crap journalism. And that goes right back to when Jimmy was killed. And Motorsport magazine had a picture of him and a caption that said, "Mere words can't express how we feel." And even then I knew a cop out when I saw it. You think, that's your job, buddy.
Yeah.
Your job is to sit down, open a vein, and say what needs to be said about these people. And I've done at least 3 obits live in a press room about a friend, and you just get on with it.
Yeah.
You don't cop out. So Ian Scott Watson, the man who discovered Jimmy, died recently. And Joe said, "But it's 7 pages." So I said, "And what's your point?" "Well, it's rather long." So I said, "That's the point, Joe. That's why Grand Prix Plus is what it is, because it's for grown-ups who want to read, who want to hear stories about Formula One. It's not for people who just want, oh yeah, I've got 2 seconds of attention span." And who else is going to write an obit that long about a decent bloke who did an awful lot apart from just discover Jim Clark?
Yeah. I've been not criticised. I've been sort of saying, "Oh yeah, sometimes what you write on these articles, it's a bit too long. I haven't got time to read it all." It's like 5 paragraphs. It's not like it's an essay. I mean, but in terms of today, I haven't got time to read that. It's like it's going to take 90 seconds. You can't just dash things off.
There's plenty of other places you can go to get quick information, but I'm as old school. I prefer to read stuff that's sort of insightful, that you learn something from. And I like to write stuff that I hope is deemed to be the same way.
That's exactly it.
Courses for courses. If you don't like that, you don't buy GP Plus. But if you do, it might be the thing for you, or else you go to, whatever newspaper does a little quick sort of stuff. I mean, Autosport, that's another one for grown-ups who want to read a lot. They do a fantastic job.
Yeah, definitely. And they have done for many, many, many years. I mean, you mentioned about saying things to people's faces. That's why I like doing these, because I sometimes find out a lot about myself. I think, oh, how am I going to approach that? One of these first ones I did, the 7th or 8th one, was with Derek Warwick, and I thought, how on earth am I going? Derek was one of my heroes as a kid.
Did you ask him why it's taken him so long to read our book?
I didn't bring that up. I wasn't brave enough, but I thought, how on earth am I going to approach Paul's death?
Yeah.
And I just had a line on a bit of paper, and I was like, and I said, just do it. And saying something to someone's face, you have to be able to do it. And
absolutely.
And as you say, there's 99% of people out there who wouldn't. Yeah, you do find out a lot about yourself, but I think, if you're going to be honest about something, you may as well just come out with it. So,
yeah, I mean, people can see, particularly when it's face to face, people can see the context and how you're dealing with it, and it's not like you're doing it for prurient reasons. You're doing it because it's something you have to ask.
Yeah.
Derek's very good on all of that.
Yeah, he was excellent, and I actually
remember having to phone him. Paul was killed on our wedding anniversary, and I had to call Derek the next day from MN, and he was so brave and good about wanting to put you at your ease when, because normally it's not the sort of thing you ever do, but there was a friendship, so we wanted to do it properly for Paul.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think people in that situation understand that.
Yeah.
It's the sort of sniping. I mean, there's something interesting, like with the internet, where it's a lawless town, isn't it?
Yes.
Joe's sister was a victim of the Ealing Vicarage rape in 1986.
Oh, right.
And when she died, I think it was 2 years ago now, there was so much spiteful, hateful stuff on the internet. And no matter how hard he tried to trace the people who'd done it, he couldn't. And the police couldn't trace them either. And that kind of thing, you think is just, that's the worst thing about the internet.
Yeah.
There's a lot of very, very good things about it, but that's the worst. But again, it comes down to, you don't have to look anyone in the face.
Yeah, you can just bash something out and forget about it and think there's no comeback on it, which is...
It's the same with the driver. If you write something critical of a driver, it's only fair that you should be able to back it up. And if you can't, then, that's not so good.
Then get out, yeah. Yeah, and I just think it's just a common decency thing.
Yeah.
But
there's not a lot of that on the internet, I think, because people don't have any responsibility.
Yeah, exactly. And, as I said, the internet's been great for me the last few years because it's given rise to things like this. But there's just so much, just hate and negativity and unfounded nastiness, and it's awful. It's horrendous. But yeah, I am glad we agree on the journalistic side. I always try and be factual, see both sides, and put it across in a way that's not look at me. It's just there.
Yeah, I mean, it's 9 times out of 10 you shouldn't be part of the story. Sometimes you are, and you can't help it. But 9 times out of 10, it's not about you. It's about the subject or the people within that subject. That's what people want to read about.
Exactly. I mean, just before we move on, I mean, obviously, awful, tragic news about Jimmy Johnson and his wife and everything that's happened in the last 24 hours or so. And I put something out today, and everyone was like, "Oh, that's tragic. It's awful." I didn't go into detail. I said this is the situation, and it's an ongoing investigation. But love and thoughts and condolences to everyone concerned, and left it at that. And of all the people that commented on it and engaged with it and said, "Oh, that's awful. Thank you for letting us know," things like that. There was one person who said, "Oh, I know you cover motorsport, but this should be a private matter." I went, "Well, are you going to tell NBC and NASCAR and Fox and everyone else to do that?" I said, "No, this is a platform to put motorsport things out there. This is unfortunately something that's not wanted, but maybe if we can let more people know, then there's more support for Jimmy and Chandra and everyone else at an awful time, which I know I'd appreciate."
Yeah, I don't think there's any doubt that that's something that, people want to know.
Yeah.
Because they care about it. It's not because it's a prurient thing at all. It's they want to know.
And I've always said when that kind of thing happens, everyone's saying, "Oh, you shouldn't be discussing it right now. It's not the time." I said, "Well, this might be someone that you've not heard of, and you've gained a bit of knowledge about it. It's not terribly nice, but some people do want to know about these things."
I mean, the flip side of that
And
was when David was
if you do
killed.
it the right way, it's always meant to be the right way, then there's no harm in it. Surely, it's just making people aware of something that's happened, and more people can rally around them. That's my way of thinking, anyway.
Yeah, no, I agree. And the flip side of that is when David died, and we were going to the funeral and everything. There were all the sort of snappers there wanting to get the unhappy faces and the grief and all that
Yeah.
kind of thing. And you just think, you need what they call the art to go with the story.
Yeah.
I think really, so you really need to have the grieving widow just to make your story stand up.
Well, exactly. Yeah. I mean, it's when I put a post about, on this day, sadly, so and so passed away. Don't post a photo of the car they died in or the
No,
accident or
it's
anything like that.
respectful to the
You
date.
post a nice smiling picture of the person and some of the cars they drove and a bit of history and how it happened and things like that, and you move on. Some people love to feed on the, as you say, on the negative.
Well,
On
when
the fact,
David died, there was a guy from the Daily Mail on the doorstep of the Leslie's house, and there was a kid from the Banbury Gazette or whatever it is. And Jane said, "Is there any way you can persuade this kid to leave?" So I just spoke to him and said, "I'm a journalist, you're a journalist. I'm in Bahrain, you're in Banbury, but I'm going to be in Banbury on Tuesday. And I would really ask you very nicely to think, imagine that Jane was your mum. How would you like some kid camped on her doorstep, just waiting to grab anything the minute she steps outside?" I said, "You're not going to get anything more. If you want to know anything about him, I'll tell you whatever you want to know. But just because the mail's there doesn't mean to say you have to be, if that's what you think being a good journalist is." And in the end, he left. But I suppose that's life, isn't it?
yeah, yeah, exactly. It's
The
just,
sport's a small place. It's not like a huge globe, is it? It's like a family.
yeah,
Um,
it's
and
a
the
community.
families don't forget when people ill treat it.
Yeah, yeah, and but if you do things right, then people will soon know about that as well. So
Yeah, if you do it honourably, then that's a different matter.
yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Right, move on to sort of slightly happier things. Back to the motorsport, which is why we're here. We love the motorsport side. Really quickly, Carl Jones, he's asked me to inform David about my T-shirt I wore at Thruxton. I know Carl Jones is a huge fan of Tom Price. Now, Tom Price,
Ah, yes.
Tom Price, obviously was before my time. Obviously, he was very sadly lost in that awful accident, which we're going to just touch on later. Before I was even born, but I just love his story. Nice, quiet Welsh chap, terrific racer. And I wore a Tom Price T-shirt because I knew Carl was a huge fan, and I thought, well, if I'm going to meet Carl, I've got this Tom Price T-shirt. It's a grey one with retro stripes on it, and him in the shadow on it. Yeah, so he just said I've got to bring that up, but it's a cool T-shirt. I know Carl really appreciated it, so that was very nice to
It's
see.
funny, Carl, because I nearly wore my Tom Price T-shirt tonight.
I nearly wore mine. How weird!
I'm not
There's
sure
a
where
toss
it
up
is.
between that and the engine, but
But, now, Tom Price, it's funny because I know we talked briefly in our notes that we spoke about mentoring, and there's somebody I'm helping to sort of with their early stuff, and they said that they're quite shy about approaching people. And in 1972, I was within like 6 feet of Tom Price in the paddock at Silverstone for the International Trophy F3 race. I think that's Tom Price. That's the guy that won at Brands Hatch. And I was about to go and finally plug up the courage to approach him, and then somebody else did. So I never got to speak to him.
oh
And
wow.
I decided I'm never going to let that happen again. And yet I was saying to this girl that, if you find yourself being reluctant, imagine that I'm just giving you a shove to get on with it.
Yeah,
But it can still happen. And I remember, of all the stupid things I've ever done in my career, Greg Moore came to Canada, I think in '97. And I thought the world of him as a driver.
He was superb, wasn't he?
And I was too shy to go and talk to him. And I told Dario that, and he said, "You're a bleeping idiot." Of all the people you could do that with, he's the last one who would have not responded.
Mm.
And then I remember in '99, after Greg had been killed, my Tom, who's named after Tom Price, his girlfriend at Christmas bought him this video, and he unwrapped it. There's a Greg Moore video that I didn't even know existed. And I said to Natalie, "Where did you find that?" She said, "Just looked it up on the internet."
Wow.
And Greg Moore for me was a massive character.
Mm.
You know, like Ashley Judd used to describe him as the nexus of all the guys. So there was Greg, and he would pull all the others in, and no matter what he did, everyone always loved him.
Yeah. I mean, I remember watching that, and I was seeing some highlights of it, and it was just awful because he was going to be a superstar, wasn't he? He was a top driver.
I think he would have been a very good F1 driver too.
Yeah, I've often said if he'd come over to do F1, he would have done very, very well. It's the red gloves, isn't it? Greg Moore's red gloves.
Red gloves rule.
Red gloves rule. That's it.
Yeah.
So yes, that was. Yeah. So there we go. That's a t-shirt. Tracy Hickley just said there's a lovely memorial in Ruthin to Tom Price, which I am aware of. I've not been to Ruthin, but I've seen pictures and it does look lovely. And I should be making the. I've got friends up there. So
it's a sort of.
It's quite understated, isn't it?
It's sort of bronzy.
Yeah, it's got big like a bronze plaque, isn't it, with the bricks around and.
Yeah, it's really nice.
Yeah, really nicely done. Lovely. So yes, there we go. That was Tom Price. I'm going to come to that very shortly, but just on the, I just want to come on to like the books and everything, because obviously you've written 50 plus books on all manner of motorsport subjects. Some absolutely fantastic ones. I've read some of them. Obviously, it's something that you touched on it earlier, especially drivers that have been lost, and said that they shouldn't be forgotten, and that's kind of the driving or a driving force by your books and everything. I've always wondered about writing books, because I obviously haven't. Something I'd like to do on some subject at some point in my life. But do you have a template approach to a book, or does it just depend on the subject matter? And how do you decide on the subject matter? Because you strike me as someone who knows about the history of motorsport, F1, speed record and stuff. There's probably a lot to pick from in your mind that you'd like to put on, that you'd like to put in between two covers. Do you have like a template or a process, or how you choose what you're going to write about?
It depends on the story. I mean, the first thing you do once you've decided what you want to write about is figure how you're going to break it down. So you do a synopsis in your head, and then you formalize it. But yeah, I've usually got a pretty good idea how I'm going to do it and what I want to say. And one of the first things I'll do is work out a list of people that I really need to speak to.
Right.
And in purely pragmatic terms, you usually put a little marker against the people who might not be around forever.
Sure.
Just out of common sense. I've learned the hard way that I need to be pretty passionate about the book I'm going to do. I've done a couple where I'm sort of halfway through and you think, why am I really doing this? And I like people books. I like books about either people's or projects, like the Diesel Max book. Everyone thinks that went together in 3 months after the project was wrapped up. Well, it went together actually in 2 months, because the first month I was busy doing something else. And that was a brilliant project, because I forget how many words. It was only about 60,000 words or something, but it was great just banging it together, sending it off, getting the layouts, captions back, writing them. And everyone who worked on the book did it at the same kind of speed that Andy drove the car at. And that was really good fun, because suddenly 2 months later, bang, your book's ready to be printed.
Wow.
but I like people books more than anything else.
Yeah.
Like the Donald Campbell book, I always knew I'd write that sometime,
Mm.
even when I was a kid. Going to libraries, and that was the only place you could find any information.
Mm.
I
I'm
mean,
going to hold my hand up. I haven't read it yet, but it is on my. It's over there. I've got it. It's over there, and I've not read it. I got it for Christmas, and it's in there.
my shelves are full of books I buy, and then I don't necessarily read them when I buy them.
Yeah, I mean, I could buy it because you've got the interest, but you think, when am I going to read that? But I will
It
get
really
around
takes
to it.
time, though, doesn't it? Unless
Yeah,
I always read last thing at night, but I read novels then. I don't read novels in the day because
right.
then I think I should be working and not. But that I just knew I wanted to write his story, and luckily I got, the job took me to lots of places where you would interface with people who knew him or worked with him or whatever, and out comes the tape. You download them as soon as you can.
Yeah.
We're working on, like, the Derek Warwick book is written and has been, Derek's read it through twice now, and we're happy where we are, and we're at the photo stage. So
Right.
I think that's probably coming out early next year.
I mean, he actually said that. He said, "Oh, there." He said, "Oh, yeah." When I spoke to him, I mentioned I spoke to him 2020, and they said, "Oh, someone mentioned, God, Derek, you've got to do a book," and he goes, "Well, actually," and he said,
we are a complete bust, the pair of us, because we actually started talking about this in 2017. It was really funny because last year we talked about it in Hungary in 2017. Last year we all went out for dinner, and I was saying, I'm sure it was near here that we went for that dinner, wasn't it? And then it goes, there was actually that table over there in the corner, and I went, oh yeah. But the thing that really revolutionized it, because we kept saying, give me dates, I'll come to Jersey, whatever, blah blah, and we did that once, and then COVID kind of came along and everything else. But we kept yelling at each other, we've got to do this. And then Zoom suddenly came into one's orbit, which revolutionized everything, because then you just do it by Zoom, and it's a fantastic way. You just record it, get it transcribed, and bang on to the next chapter. And we got a really good thing going with that. But as Dario pointed out, it's actually quite funny for me to be doing a book with a driver who's still alive.
Of course, yeah.
That's quite a good point, actually.
Yeah, but it's just nice that that's something positive that came out of COVID, because it was awful for all of us. But the fact that you could find a new way of getting a book together, things like that, and things like this, which people, but there was some good things that come out of it.
Yes, thankfully.
You kind of mentioned Dario. I'd love to get him on here, but honestly, trying to get hold of him, it's like punching fog. Trying to get hold of Dario.
Yes.
For the show.
Yes.
But he's a man very much in demand with, obviously, and he does a lot of stuff with Gordon Murray, doesn't he? So
he's super busy because he still does.
Maybe one day I'll get him.
Is he still involved with Formula E? I can't remember. He's certainly keeping himself busy.
He was involved with Formula E. He's involved with Chip Ganassi, isn't he? Yep. He's involved with Ganassi Racing, and he's doing all bits and pieces with Gordon Murray just down the road from here, and he's all over the show. Yeah, I'm trying to help him. I'll get him. I'll get hold of him somehow.
It's worth waiting for.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I would love to. I would love to do that. Just very quickly, just back to the process of the writing thing. You said you've got a way that you'd like to do it. Do you find that it changes in the process of writing a book because of the way it's going, or you have an idea, you think, I can go on a different route with this?
It depends what you find out. I'm sure there's, you can be flexible and modify things. The basic process stays the same. Which is, an interview, whether it's face-to-face, Zoom or whatever, then I get all my stuff transcribed. Now, I did 90 hours of transcription on the Campbell book. Wow. And I like anal insofar as I want every word down as it was spoken. And I don't believe in doing a broad brush interpretation of what somebody said. I'll use their full quotes unless the English needs polishing up a little bit.
Yeah, you
But
can tweak bits. Yeah, yeah.
getting it, I use a very good company called Transcription City, which that and Zoom have kind of revolutionized the process. But you'll sort of work on a chapter at a time. So particularly if it was for want of a horrible expression, a live driver, then you sort of decide, well, now we need to do Formula Ford in 77 or whatever. So you'll do all of that in one hit. So off it goes, and then it comes back, and that's
Right.
a basic chapter that you then massage into what you want it, how you want it to read.
Okay. Right. Yeah.
And
Kind of
then
get the pieces
one
bits.
of the great things to start off with a list of all the chapters, and then you start adding in the word counts for each. And the best
Right.
part of any book is when you get right to the end and you add it all up and okay, that's your word count for this book.
Wow.
It's a great feeling when you finally got to that stage, and by then you're already thinking, what's my next book going to be? What do I want to do next? Because it's a good thing to have something lined up.
When I remember, I saw. I obviously done some research on this, and I saw a chat you had with a fellow. I can't remember his name. Forgive me, but you said when you've got a mountain in front of you, when you're halfway up it, you need to think about the next one. You need to think about the next one you're going to climb, or some
Yeah, I think
words to
so.
that
I mean,
effect.
I quite like that because
I think it's terrific, and I'm exactly the same. Yeah,
it's
I'm the
good
same.
for you, isn't it? I mean, that
It just
partly
keeps your brain
comes
ticking over.
it comes from a sort of Campbell comment, if you like, that I remember reading a long time ago when he was saying what really hurts in life is when you come to the top of life's last mountain.
Yeah, yeah,
You
yeah.
know, you never know if you have. Um,
True. Yeah.
but I got his point that you always want to believe there's another one
Mm.
out there. Like
I mean,
Carol's question, what are you going to do after gold? You know, you've got to have something.
yeah, exactly. And I take it even back to a baser level. You need to have something to look forward to.
Yes, you do.
I enjoy putting out 2, 3 articles posts a day on here. And there's just, oh, do you not get tired of it? I went, well, no, because I love it. I love because I always find out about things when I'm doing research and I find things out. And it was just, oh, you've done all these interviews. Do you ever want to have a break? No, because I love speaking to people about motorsport, people that have been there and done it, or who are doing it, and you always want the next one, which I think that's
The
what
good
keeps life
thing,
interesting.
the good thing about racing is there always is the next one.
Yeah, and hopefully there always will be.
I,
Well, will be for
the
the
thing,
foreseeable.
the thing I find it's quite interesting the older you get because you suddenly start thinking, well, hang on, all the drivers from the 50s pretty much are gone. I think there's De Silva Ramos and Hans Hermann left, and that's it. And a lot of the 60s guys have gone. And I'm kind of thinking, shit, yeah, who am I going to go and ask about? I don't know, Ignazio Giunti. Who's going to tell me who's left that can do that?
Yeah, yeah,
Because the one thing, what I love is finding out more and more and more all the time about the old days
yeah. So
and the history of it all. And then you suddenly sort of think you start to become the guy that the young guys come and ask, what was Senna like? The way I used to go to Jabby Cronbach and Ian
yeah,
Young and people like that and say, what was Colonel John Simone like? And Jabby would always have a story about these people and was never, ever reluctant to share them.
right.
Which, if you think about it, that was like arguably his pension, all that knowledge. And you'd go and
Yeah,
ask him, and he would immediately start telling you what Raymond Sommer was like, or these obscure people from the 50s.
yeah,
And you get to a stage in your life when you think, well, there's no one else left to tell you about that.
yeah. The people are all sadly departing.
It's going on in the modern era as well, which is great. But equally, you meet fewer people around the world that you can jump on and download their stories.
Yeah, absolutely. Which is why they need to be which is why they need to be told while they
Yeah,
still can. I mean, I've got a couple of people coming on here, which I'm not going to give away, who are in that bracket, and yeah, and as I say, they're not going to be around forever. So, obviously, there's so many books we can touch on. I'm just conscious of the time, but there's so many books we can touch on. There is one that I have read recently, and it's probably one that's been very well known. Is the book about Jochen Rindt. just want to say, absolutely fantastic piece of work. Absolutely brilliant, brilliant, brilliant book. I remember you saying that you'd not met him, but you saw him race and things like that. When did you first start thinking? Because obviously, as we know, he's the world's only posthumous Formula One world champion. We all know, we've all seen the incident and everything else like that. But what you did in the book, you captured the racer on it and the man off it absolutely fantastically. When did you first think this would be a good subject to write about, or this is something that needs to be told?
I think probably towards the end of The Lost Generation.
Another fantastic.
That would probably have been it. But, you know, the Jochen thing always, so much about him fascinated me.
Yeah.
You know, his friendship with Jackie, the way they were such good friends and yet fierce rivals and yet super gentlemanly on track. Like the 69 British Grand Prix, a bit like everyone loves the 79 French because of Arnoux versus Villeneuve as an all-out cage fight on a track.
Yeah.
Jackie and Jochen were lapping at record speed and yet swapping places 3 times a lap. You know, they just one would point the other one past, and you think that's real racing. And there was always this big thing about Jochen being arrogant, and the more I researched it, the less that held up, and less it was somebody like Jenks, who Jochen just had no time for him because Jenks thought Jochen was a fraud. And you think that's just so stupid. Be like someone saying that Max Verstappen's not the real thing. It's a silly thing to say. And actually, I think Jochen was really quite a cool guy. I think he was quite a kindly bloke, and he was, you know, Jackie and he were super close.
Yeah, they were, and obviously, you know, there was like Helen and Nina were close as well, and it was a whole. It was almost like almost like brothers, weren't they? They were incredibly close.
Yeah.
But obviously, it was like, so Jackie did the foreword for the book. I mean, I guess he was the obvious choice. I guess he was number one.
The fun thing was, going back to the Jackie photo in Autocar all those years ago, it was almost 40 years to the day that I went down to see Jackie to interview him for that. And I left stupidly early so that, you know, even if there was a traffic jam, I wasn't going to be late. Get to the end of my road, phone rings. David, it's Jackie. Could you leave a bit earlier? Blah, blah, blah. Emerson's coming for lunch. So excellent. So
wow.
There's Emerson. And the 3 of us had a fantastic lunch. And I sort of raised a glass and said, I want to thank the man who saved my house by winning the Indy 500 in 1993. And they're both looking like that. And I said, well, it's clearly not you. And Emerson said, how did I do that? And I said, because Roebuck and I were there. And I bet Roebuck my house Mansell wasn't going to win. And then he bangs the wall 8 laps to go. And they couldn't throw the yellows quick enough to help him out.
Yeah.
And then they had a restart and Emerson nailed it and beat them all, which was very funny. But that was a day because, you know, you're sitting between these 2 guys with 5 world championships.
What a lunch that is.
You know, I'm a 14-year-old kid again, but equally these are mates. And then I did a piece with Emerson about Jochen, and he told me some lovely stuff. And then one of Jackie's grandkids came in and sort of offered him thing, and Emerson signs it. And then he says, did you get your grandfather's autograph? And the kid sort of goes, like, why would I want his?
No.
And then Emerson just said, because he was much better than I was. And I thought, that's classy.
Wow.
Obviously, the kid, you know, didn't really know much about what Granddad used to do.
Sure.
Well, I thought that was such a lovely little thing.
What a lovely thing.
Emerson, he demonstrated the Lotus 72 at Interlagos, and it must have been 2012. Yeah, gosh, that's a long time ago.
Because
But
he was up at Lotus recently, wasn't he? Having a
yeah,
blast
I
around the
mean, there's
track
a lot
and
of
all that.
stuff with that. But they had a sort of 70s mock-up garage out the back, and Aya Elg is there, and he says, I saw what you're doing. So I said, what? He says, I saw you were pushing Emerson's car down to the last corner, ready to go out of the pits. I said, and he said, I know your secret. And then I end up holding Emerson's helmet for a minute, and I said, I never thought in my career I'd end up being your bloody helmet carrier. I said, but I did watch you win the international trophy in this in 1972. And the first thing he said was, yeah, but Mike Hale would have me covered that day. He should have won. And he did, because Mike was gone, and then the car overheated. And you just think, how much class does a guy have to come out with that straight away? There was no sort of, yeah, I really blew the doors off them all. It was just,
Yeah, it's like almost instant deprecation, almost,
oh,
and it's
I love people with that kind of class.
yeah,
And then Jackie was there, and it was just, watching those two and seeing, like, I was always amazed to learn they were friends.
yeah,
When I was a kid watching radio, you'd think, well, they're going to be like this, aren't they? But they were.
because they're such fierce rivals.
Now, do you remember there was Mark Stewart did a movie on them, and they were both looking face to face, side
With
view,
the,
with the sideburns.
yeah, yeah, I remember that. Yeah, and you think these guys can't be mates. They're like gladiators almost. It's like yeah,
It was like
fantastic.
Nicky when he and James were fighting in '76 at Watkins Glen. Nicky goose stepped into James's bedroom. So today I win the world championship, and then turned on his thing and goose stepped out. You sort of think, yeah, I can't imagine Lewis and Max doing that.
No,
No.
no. No, not even close. I mean, it's just a wonderful era. I mean, I wish I'd been around for it. Unfortunately, sadly, I wasn't, of course. But um, it's just a different world. I mean, just
I
another.
actually think the '70s was my favourite. I mean, I loved the late '60s, but I think the '70s, certainly the first half of the '70s, was my favourite era of Formula One.
I mean, because I was born in '81, and because that was the era immediately prior to my interest in Formula One, I've always had a real interest in it because a lot of the guys who were racing in the '80s, when I was, when there was like, it was like John Watson and Nicky Lauda and Ayrton and Nigel. Some of them had sort of raced in the late '70s, and that got me looking into the mid and the early '70s. And it's just absolutely fantastic, because all the cars look different. The circuits were proper. There wasn't 40 miles of runoff at each corner, and it just had something for me. And I really wish I'd been around.
And then anything, it wasn't all done to the nth degree on the cars.
Mm.
And that's part of why everyone's successful and fast, who is successful and fast these days.
It's like
But
super tuned. Yeah.
there's something about the fact that there was still plenty of meat left there, so they were still pretty. I mean, we used to think the Ferraris were so dominant, and they were like half a second quicker or whatever.
Yeah.
That's not like things can be today.
Yeah.
And you're right, the cars. I remember 10 years ago, there was a thing like 12 black silhouettes of Formula One cars. Can you tell them apart? And I'm going, well, that's a Sauber. And somebody goes, no, it's not. That's a McLaren. And you think, shit, you could barely tell them apart.
Whereas if they did it in the '70s, you'd go, right, that's a Tyrrell, that's a Hesketh, that's
Just
March,
wouldn't
that's a
mistake it,
Ligier.
would
It's just fabulous looking cars,
you?
brilliant stuff.
If I might just mention, there's three really good books worth looking at. One's Tyrrell by Richard Jenkins. One's the Hesketh book by James Page, I think it is, and there's Flux's book. And all of them, the Tyrrell one's fantastic because of all the eras it covers. The Hesketh one's great because I love that particular team.
Absolutely, yeah.
The Fluxy one I was playing earlier is just very funny.
And I wonder if I can reach it. I can just about. The thing about the shapes of the cars, I've got that sitting on my
Oh, 30. Is
on my
that
window ledge.
308C?
That's the 308B, that one. Mm.
Oh yeah, yeah.
And I've just next to it, I'm going to get them all out, but I've got like Brambilla's March, and I've got Jackie's Tyrrell and Emerson's Lotus, and
What make is that?
sorry,
What make is it?
it's just one of the F1 ones.
Yeah, I bought some of them. It was funny enough. I've got that.
I just gifted it, but yeah, I showed that to Freddie Hunt, and he went, "Oh, that's really cool." But yeah, I'm not going to get them all out because we're digressing. But yeah, they look proper cars, proper looking cars. I just want to come back to something very quickly on. I think it was during the Jochen book. I read it somewhere. I'm sure. Was there a hotel room or a
Oh
suite
yes,
somewhere
yes,
that they don't use because
yes.
is it 307 or something? Was it? I
308.
can't. 308. What was the
It's,
story behind that? I just had it in
well,
my mind that you'd spoken about it.
when we used to stay in the Dillaville, which eventually A became too expensive, and B, the little group of us, I was the last one left. So
Is
I
that the
didn't
one on
want
the
to,
corner?
yeah, I didn't
Yeah,
want to stay there being Johnny No Mates
by the park.
in the thing, which is a shame, but everything finishes eventually. But we used to go down, meet in the bar, whole group of people, and the two brothers that run it. Somehow we just got talking, and then they said that one day, obviously Jochen got killed in 1970, and then in 73 Jarno Saarinen got killed. And to their horror, they realised that they'd both been in room 308.
Wow.
So they said from that moment on, we swore no driver would ever stay in that room again.
Wow.
So we're all kind of, oh, okay. And then Herbie Blash and Charlie Whiting were there. So what rooms? And I think they're in like 307 and 309. So we go, so who's in 308? And someone goes, oh, it's Tim Mayer. Now Tim comes in a bit later on. We go, wait, are you okay? Yeah. You sure? Do you feel all right? Yeah, no, I'm fine. I've had a really good day.
No chest pains, anything?
You know that you're staying in room 308. Well, yeah. So, and then that's.
I wonder how his face turned when you told him.
But again, how spooky is that? That those
Yeah.
two both stayed in that same.
One of those freaky
And
things.
it's such a, if you ever can afford it and can get in there, it's just the most wonderful hotel. It's the best place we ever used to stay. And despite the expense and everything, the rooms were always yours until you decided you didn't want them. And
Right.
Alan Henry one year took his family to Monza, and some other bloke took the room for that year. And then he goes, at the end of his stay, he said, I really like that. I'd like that room next year. They said, I'm sorry, that's Mr. Henry's room. And Mr. Kaijo Rosberg, world champion 1982, was really pissed off that of course, he and Alan were extremely good friends. So Alan used to take the mickey out of Keki forever, saying, did you enjoy my room?
Got in there.
But the lovely thing about that was loads of people from F1 stayed there. So in the restaurant, there was always someone to cruise around and be rude to during dinner. And it was just the most wonderful place to stay, unless you were in 308.
I mean, obviously, I've not been. I've been past it. I went to Monza. I took a hired Fiat Panda around Monza. Not sure it was covered by the hire.
Yeah, that was fun.
It was interesting. Yeah, going around the Parabolica, a super bike thumping past you around the outside.
In fact,
in a sort of, what was it, 27 miles an hour because the thing's tipping over. Yeah, I wish someone had a camera. But it's a terrific hotel and a fantastic place. Just very quickly, I mean, again, so many books we can talk about. We've got to talk about Jim Clark because to many he's the greatest racing driver ever. I know Sir Jackie certainly thinks that. Obviously he's so well known that he's got so many fans and people know a lot about him. Was there ever a concern in your book? You're thinking, oh crikey, some people are going to come back saying I've got that wrong, but I guess you've got things from the horse's mouth, haven't you? So it's
I don't think people would think it was wrong. I would think a lot of people would say, who was Jim Clark? It annoys the hell out of me that everyone talks about Senna and Schumacher like they can't remember anyone else who was any good.
It's almost like in the world of football, everyone thinks it started in 1992, and everyone thinks that because people of my age, you talk about people from our lifetime. I know full well like Fangio and Clark and all the even like Jochen, who is scandalously overlooked in that category. These guys were the proper drivers, weren't they? Proper
Yeah, I
drivers.
mean, my top three all time would be Jimmy, Lewis, and Gilles. But I'm perfectly willing to accept that's an objective and not objective, sorry, subjective and emotional choice. But
Yeah,
that's how I see it. But if you did lists of people, would Jochen get into a top 20 list? Debatable. But if he
for
wasn't,
many, he
he
probably
wasn't.
wouldn't because he's only won it once.
But if he wasn't,
That's something that
he
comes up
was
all
as
the time, isn't it?
quick as Jimmy and as quick as Jackie. So
Mm.
that's why all these lists and trying to compare across eras is ultimately a pointless exercise. But it's quite amusing.
I've always said that. I've always said, oh, who's the greatest of all time? Impossible. Next. Because it's all down to, everyone says, Max is equal to Ayrton Senna's record wins and things. And I said, "Yeah, but you put Max in the, I don't know, the 98T or in the Tolman, and he'll probably wee himself,
You just can't do it, can you? It's like
It's
also
impossible.
the sort of glory can be quite limited. I remember flying to Monaco one year and sitting in like the middle aisle seat, and there's a guy across the aisle all dressed in Ferrari red and blah, 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 the whole time. Anyone would listen all about Michael this, Michael that, blah, blah. And then he started chatting up the stewardess. And, you could see where that was going. And it was sort of, are you going to the race? She said, no, I don't go anymore. So I said, why is that? She said, well, not since Senna. And this expert on Michael Schumacher sort of went, Well, I thought you've not even heard of Ayrton Senna,
Wow.
the guy that died trying to stay ahead of Michael in what might not have been a legal car. Don't you remember him?
Yeah.
And you think this is like 9 years after Ayrton died, and the guy had no idea. It was like this computer does not compute sort of thing.
Just couldn't fathom it. Yeah.
Never heard of Ayrton Senna.
But, I mean,
That's really quite tragic, I think.
yeah. It's not insulting, but it's really, I mean, because I've always think if you're going to understand what's happening in the present, you need to know what's gone on before it. I've always thought that about
Yeah,
anything, whether it's
I,
motorsport, football,
I
or
agree
life.
totally. Yeah.
And, it's like I will say something to someone and they go, how do you know that? I went, I read it. I just had a quick look.
Used to have them at school.
Got these little paper things that you can flick through. Yeah, it's amazing. But it's not for everyone, and everyone's sort of different. But I'm just fascinated by history. But not everyone is. Someone saying, "Oh, Sancho's the greatest of all time." It's like, hang on, what about? And you can reel off about 50 drivers. But anyway, it's all subjective, as you say. But from what I've seen, from what I've read, Jim Clark will take some
A
beating.
good score, although Fangio's is still the best strike rate, I think.
Yes.
Then he could jump from team to team at will.
Yeah.
So as Jimmy and Jackie stay with the same kind of teams.
I mean, do you look at different cars? Do you look at the numbers? Do you look at the strike rate? Do you look at
How many races there are, etc. Yeah, I mean,
I've always said some of the best drivers ever. I said, are we not going to talk about Dan Gurney? Are we not going to talk about AJ Foyt? I mean, there's so many routes you can go down. But yes, anyway. Again, conscious of the time, I don't want to. We've covered a lot of things. Just one, actually, two comments here. We're talking about Schumacher and the fellow on the plane. He said one of the Rob Harbour said one of the saddest things about Michael Schumacher is getting the unknown stories in years to come that we may not find out. Yeah, that's a good point. It's a good point. I mean, obviously we know what's the situation with Michael, and there should be books written about him, but yeah, we don't know what the situation is with Michael, so that is obviously very, very sad.
I think I've got a fairly good idea of what it is, and I think it's not dissimilar for Alex Zanardi these days, sadly.
Yes. Well, I mean, there's a chapter we can open. What a warrior that man is. Incredible, but he's not been in a very good way. In the hand cycling accident, wasn't it? And
Yeah.
Yeah, which we're not going to get into, but yeah, he's amazing guy.
Did you
Very
see,
quick.
by the way, there was I think it was a German magazine that purported to interview Michael and then admitted it was done by AI. And it was disgusting, and the woman who did it got fired,
That
thankfully.
is the lowest blow, isn't it? That's
Yeah, they had a big sort of exclusive Michael Schumacher interview, and you just think, really? Yeah, that's that kind of thing.
wow.
If that's the future, then it's not too great, is it?
Yeah, you can count me out of that. Absolutely. Just sort of question actually just pop up. Just going to wind it down shortly. Simon Steele again. Simon. He said that he loves your books, as we all do, of course. He says, which driver and or team would you write about next if you had a choice? If you could pick a maybe the current crop or a recent crop, is there a subject or a person or a team that you'd like to? Because obviously you've done about McLaren, the Wins, and Damon and Rubens, and many of the other more recent guys. Is there anyone that you'd like to cover?
Yeah, I mean, I'm doing a book, starting one for Porter Press on the Braun BGP 001 Jensen's car.
I've got a model of that over there as well.
What?
I've got a model of that over there as well.
Mika Häkkinen and I keep talking about doing a book.
That'd be great.
What was that you said about Dario punching fog?
Yeah, trying to get hold of him. Yeah,
a little bit like that with Mika. I mean, I gave him a copy of Jim Clark and said, look, it says Jim Clark, the best of the best. You could say Mika Häkkinen, he was quite good. He wants to do it. He wants to do it, and so do I, because I think Mika is a fantastic guy.
Yeah.
And he's so underwritten. So I'm hoping eventually, I think that's a 2024 project at the earliest. But the other guy I've really got a hankering to do something on is David Purley.
Oh, yes.
I know I touched on him in Lost Generation, but
yeah,
deserves his own book. And I've spoken to his daughter, Alexa, but we're kind of, I don't know where we are with that at the moment.
Right.
But
that would be terrific.
I would really like to do. I have done another book which I put together. I don't know where it's going or who might publish it, but it's called Valediction, which this might sound a bit odd, but it's like my 50 best obits.
Oh, right.
And I mentioned that to a friend, and they said, "Oh, what you mean? Like it's a celebration of their lives?" And you think, actually, that's quite a nice way to put it, because it's not all doom and gloom and dressed in black kind of stuff. It's
like picking the nice bits, and
well, it's just the proper stories of who they were.
Yeah, it's not just negatives.
And if I don't find a publisher for that, I think I'll self-publish it, because I just like the idea of that.
Yeah, that's lovely, like a lasting memory to them, and
and it's a celebration of who they were, and obviously it's Nicky and Dan and all the good guys.
Yeah, that's lovely. I think
that'd be James onwards and Innes and people like that. I think that would be. I'd really like to see that published.
Yeah, definitely. And again, it's keeping their memories alive, isn't it? Things like that. But
a lot of them, I either did that for the Independent or for Grand Prix Plus. So it'll just be a collection of them all. And I thought, if you saw Will Buxton's My Greatest Defeat book, it would be like that. That's a very good book if you haven't encountered it yet, where everybody tells their story of the worst time of their life and how they got back up off the map.
Wow.
I wish I'd thought of that.
That's a good subject matter, isn't it?
That's a super book. I mean, Will is like son number 7. So I was really proud of it for that. But that was no pictures, just an artwork of each person and then their story. And I think this would work very well in that kind of format.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, definitely would. That'd be great. Just saying, there's a lot, I've got Stuart Branch. Hi, Stuart. He said, books about David Purley and Derek Warwick. Fantastic. Yeah, I think there's a lot of love for that one.
It's been a lot of fun doing it.
Yeah.
Sure. and
Gosh,
he's a proper bloke.
great guy.
I think the publisher loves what they're reading because he's good at telling his story, and he's got a good story to tell, and he's
Yeah,
done loads of things, and he's
yeah,
a
that's the thing.
top bloke.
It's like so broad. Yeah, yes. Just saying, you mentioned about Mika and things like that. I've also people like Mika Hacken and David Coulthard, Mark Webber. Who else have I tried getting hold of? They're all like punching for it, but yeah. I'll get it's the more recent ones, but as you say, these guys from a little further back, they're always the fantastic stories.
I
Right,
gave Oscar Piastri a copy of the Rent book the other day because his PR guy told me that he's a massive fan of the sports history.
yeah,
His
well,
old stuff, which I really like.
yeah, which is lovely from someone younger of this current generation. They're interested in the history. I'm going to let everyone in a bit of secret here. About this time last year, I contacted Oscar Piastri because I thought this kid's going places. I want to get in before he goes. And they said, he's a bit busy at the moment. And I said, oh, well, his manager's Mark Webber. Could I perhaps be put with him? And they said, oh, he's even more busy, but maybe we can revisit it at a later date. And I went, oh, okay. And I thought something's going on here. Obviously, it all kicked off with Alpine and McLaren. So I was like, if I'd have asked 3 months earlier, would I have got it? Never mind. But yeah, it's fantastic that he's interested in history. But he feels like the kind of guy who would be.
You say you've had Chandok on?
Yeah, I've had Karun. Yeah, Karun's come on.
And have you had Pirro?
Yeah, Pirro. Yeah, he was absolutely brilliant. But I mean, I was quite surprised because I find because
people.
Oh, Emanuele's fantastic.
If I had a brother, it would be him.
Oh, he's such a lovely guy. He's brilliant. But I've always said, whenever I say, "Oh, guess who's coming on next," and people have a guess, and it's all like the more recent sort of folk. And obviously, I'm not a name, like or a sport or anything like that. People sort of, when I ask, they go, "Oh, who are you?" And I can name drop a little bit, but all the guys who are involved presently, very difficult to pin down because obviously they're in demand.
PR people.
Sorry?
It's because they have PR people.
Yes, they are. You can't go directly. Whereas I went straight to Karun Chandok through his website, and he came back going, "Yeah, of course we can. I'll come on and have a chat." And I thought, wow, I've got someone who's active now, in the F1 world.
Have you done Derek Bell? People like that?
No, I have. I could speak to Mike. Couldn't I? Mike Ward. Anyway, no, my only point of contact was through, I think, the Signature Store, the guy who, they do the signing and everything else like that. But no, I've not managed to get Derek yet. But Celavi, I'll keep trying. It's all about. Oh, there's so many people that I'd like to speak to, but I appreciate they're busy. They're very much in demand, so it is what it is. But
you got a good track record.
Yes, I just need to get the.
When did you start?
I started the page up 2019, October 2019, and I started doing lives. First one was Rob Gravitt from the Touring Cars. He came up with the idea. That was coming up 3 years ago. So, yeah, we'll see.
It's a good body of work. It shows, you're not there and gone tomorrow kind of thing. So
I'm trying to find a way to make money out of this and make it a living, but it's never easy.
Joe Saywood and I have been trying to find a way of making a living out of F1.
Yeah.
We worked out the other day that we've each spent £1 million, over £1 million covering F1 since the 90s.
Wow. When you add it up like that, you think, oh my word.
Since COVID, everything is about like hotels, hire cars, and flights have about doubled.
Yeah. Yeah, everything's ramped up, and
you got races like every other week coming at you like a blizzard. You look back to these days of 16 races a year. Think, wow.
Well, that's the number that I remember is 16 races a year.
I think that's better.
Oh, I do. Yeah, it's just over. I mean, every Grand Prix felt like an event, whereas now it's another one. Is it race week? Oh, thank goodness.
Three in a row or whatever, and you can think, come on.
Yeah, it's oversaturation.
I mean, eventually, if they manage to rationalize the calendar, it might help.
Yes,
Even next year, we're going to be going backwards and forwards, backwards and forwards. We might have a couple of Saturday night races and stuff
and I've
like
got
that.
Vegas, isn't it? It's Saturday night, isn't it?
Yeah, to try and sort of put it all together.
Yeah, but it's Saturday night in Vegas, isn't it? So
Yeah,
it's going to be about 4 o'clock in the morning here or whatever it is. But
yeah.
that should be an interesting one, Vegas. I mean, I was there on my honeymoon a few years ago, and it's a fantastic place. I'm not sure how it's going to work as a street circuit, but we'll see, especially with the current cars. But see
It's a
how we
wonder
go
one
with it.
in America, though, so I'm all for that.
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, it's going to make for some great photos, if nothing else, isn't it?
Yeah. And if we
So,
got 3 races in the States plus Mexico, that's pretty cool.
yeah. And there's lots of negative. I'm glad you brought that up. I mean, there's a lot of negativity about, oh, why has America got 3 races? Well, hang on, you've got a problem with America having 3 races, but you've got no issue with Europe having 11. It's
Yeah.
like
America's
it's the
quite a big
same
place.
thing.
It's quite large.
Yeah, it's a
Isn't
huge
Texas,
place.
isn't Texas bigger than the UK?
Something like that, isn't it? Yeah.
I
Yeah. I mean,
think
I
so.
was in London. I actually weirdly went to watch some baseball in London on Saturday because I went to see some out in Cincinnati when we did the 500 last year. And I got quite hooked on it. I thought it was quite good. And there was someone from Chicago saying that they were 52 years old and they've never seen the ocean apart from when they flew over it. They
I
said
remember
they've like seen the lake in Chicago and they said, well, that's quote about as big as a sea, isn't it?
there's some silly statistic about how many Americans have passports, and Lee Gorg, who left F1 back in 1992,
Hmm.
fantastic guy, ex-military, big Goodyear guy. He said the first thing he was going to do when he got home was burn his passport. But then if you think about the States, you've got pretty much every other country in there somewhere.
Yeah, there's a part of
You've got
everything.
deserts and you've got frozen bits and you've got lakes and
Got
everything
mountains
else
and
you could want.
canyons and
Yeah.
grassland and yeah. But it was amazing. My parents went on holiday, and there was this guy from I don't know Minnesota or somewhere, and they were in the Caribbean somewhere on a boat. And the first thing they did when they took the boat out and they were going to moor it, and they were going to try and see some wildlife in the boat. And the first thing this guy did was jump off the back of it, and they said, "What are you doing?" He goes, "I'm in the ocean. I'm 71 years old, and I'm in the ocean for the first time." It was like,
Wow.
that's astonishing. But it's something like 25%, isn't it, that have got passports?
Something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But anyway, digressed hugely. But I'm very pro, taking F1 to the world. If they want to have 3 in America, then so be it. That's fine by me, as long as they're different kinds of circuits.
What would be good, I think, is if they went back to
What?
alternating some. You could like alternate France and Germany, say, or
Yeah.
Zandvoort somewhere. That worked in the past, and it would open it up to a bigger audience while not necessarily bankrupting everyone.
Yeah.
And if it's a way to keep Spa going, would be quite good.
And things like Hockenheim, they've had issues, haven't they? And
Mm.
yeah, no, I think it's worth going. I mean, I've always said I'd love to see it go back to like Mo Sport and back to Watkins Glen in the States, but obviously there's facilities to think of. But yeah, maybe there's a way to do it.
We drove around Mont Tremblant a couple of years ago, and that was fun. No, I mean, it wouldn't be a Formula One track anymore, but it was a pretty neat track in its day.
Yeah. I mean, who was I talking to? Was it Mike? I think it was Mike. Mike Wiles. He was talking about like Montjuic in Barcelona, and he just said it was a fantastic place to go racing. It was the best place he'd ever raced. I'm sure it was Mike. Or was it John? No, I think it was John Watson. Actually, John Watson said,
Yeah,
I think he said it was John. There's a dilemma I never thought I'd have in my head. But anyway, I just want to touch on a few things of like today's motorsport very quickly. The loss of the W Series, that was always a bit of a shame. I mean, it always felt like there was always going to be opposition to it, with it being all female and free to enter. And we've got the F1 Academy, which seems to be doing very well. Just wondering if you had any thoughts on that, because I know there's people saying, "Oh, why is it female only? Why is it this? Why is it that?" And I've always said, women have found it very difficult to get into motorsport, sometimes due to intimidation because it's so male or whatever, and said, why isn't there a male only one if there's a female only one? I said, well, rather than asking that question, let's just be grateful there isn't the need for it. We just want to say hello to Michael Crease, recent British touring car and GT driver. Hello, Creasy. But yeah, I can see why there's opposition to single gender series. Until as a white male, I have no idea about prejudice and persecution and feelings of inferiority or anything. So I'm not perhaps the best one to talk about it.
I disagree that I don't believe it's that difficult for women to get in. When my boys were karting, there were lots of girls doing it.
As there is now. Yeah.
I think that's a bit of a construct to sort of help justify certain things. One of the things I wasn't comfortable about was quite good friends with Tatiana Calderon, and she was quite critical of W Series until she got a slap on the knuckles and was sort of told by the powers that be that she should be supporting the sisterhood. And her point was dead simple. She wanted to race against the best.
Yeah, which is the attitude of we got like Sophia Flörsch and the Iron Dames.
Yeah, like Des Wilson. She was, who was far and away the best female racing driver, circuit driver I've ever seen.
Absolutely.
I don't know. I mean, it didn't help that Jamie Chadwick won all the series.
Yes.
And then, I mean, to be, again, best will in the world, some of the F1 academies, some of the people that are winning races are people that Jamie Chadwick beat. So,
yeah.
But I think I have absolutely no doubt that somewhere, at some time, will be another woman good enough to race in Formula One.
Agreed.
I don't see that there's a ceiling to it or anything else. The biggest problem you're going to get is the first time another Des comes along, there's enough pressure on the Jamie Chadwicks of the world as it is, with expectation. If somebody of Des's character and capability comes along, like Simona de Silvestre was pretty good as well, there's going to be huge expectation on them, and that's something that's really hard to deal with. It's bad enough for the guys, but for the women as well. I mean, I had a discussion with Manisha Kaltenborn and Natalie Pinkham about Maria de Villota.
Yes.
Best will in the world. I think my kids had done better racing than she had.
Yeah.
And Natalie said, well, you're sexist. So I said, I'm not sexist, I'm racist. I'm motor racist. And the thing that matters to me is called a stopwatch. You're either quick or you weren't. And Desiree Wilson was quick enough. It's just her problem, ironically, was that because of apartheid, she didn't really get the breaks that she needed at that time.
Yes, it was how her world was at the time, wasn't it?
I was just reading about, Richard Jenkins' book again, reminding myself what she did in that race, the one Formula One race she did that was then declared null and void.
Yeah.
And she outqualified Eddie Cheever, and she caught and passed him off after making a bad start in the rain. And Des did win a Formula One race in the Aurora series. So why shouldn't, and 2 World Endurance Championship races? So it's entirely possible. You just need to find the right one. And Layla Lombardi, as Sky insisted on calling her, Layla was really good. She was much better than she looked in that March. And Robin Hurd told me that she was always saying there was something wrong with the car. And basically they didn't care enough to investigate. And then they found that the rear subframe had a crack in it and had for most of the season. And then when when Layla went down under and raced Max Stewart in Formula 5000 and Kevin Bartlett, she gave them a hell of a scare in an old Matic against their Lolas. So, she had the stones to do the job.
Yeah, she had the ability.
Why I think it's possible. And funnily enough, I used to have the view that if my boys had been girls, we'd have had more opportunities to solicit sponsorship because there's so many different female-only products, all
Yeah,
sorts of things from hair care and everything else.
it's like a unique opportunity,
I
perhaps.
always felt we'd have had a better opportunity.
Mm.
So I don't know. I mean, it's easy for everyone to talk down their chances and say it was tough and whatever, but it's tough for everyone.
Yeah, true.
I'm not super comfortable with a one class of driver only.
Yeah,
I don't think it didn't do any harm. Let's put it that way.
yes, yeah.
I didn't think the racing was super exciting.
No.
There are a couple of people who could have challenged Jamie more than they did, but it just didn't work out.
Yeah,
We'll see what the F1 Academy brings.
yeah. We'll see where it goes. I mean,
Fundamentally, Formula One is a sport in which women can succeed at all levels.
yeah,
Lots of female engineers who are bloody good, or strategists or whatever. And certainly on the PR side, I don't see a glass ceiling for them.
no, sure. I mean, on here, I've spoken to like Sabra Cook and to Sarah Moore, who have both done W Series, and they've said even when they were doing it, they said, "Well, we're not sure this is the way to go." But what they did say was that they wouldn't be racing if it wasn't for it.
Exactly. That was good in a way because
people get hung up on the female to F1 side of it, whereas that's not really the be all and end all of it.
Yeah,
it's just that we've got like Sabra Cook. She's out doing the Porsche, the Porsche GT sort of challenge out in the States, and I think Sarah was looking at something this year, but it's got them into other series and other roles, and it's done a lot more for the wider female community. But perhaps the F1 side didn't really take off, of course. But then again, on the flip side, I spoke with Catherine Legg just before the Indy 500, and she said it's not for me. She said if she didn't have a drive, she might have gone for it, but that would have been the only reason.
No, I mean, Catherine's far higher level than that anyway, and I love the fact that
she's very, very, very good, and she had a good weekend this weekend, didn't she?
She did what?
She had a good weekend this weekend. They came third in class at the Glen, Watkins Glen, I think they were at, and she's did well there. So yeah,
I like the way she went out to see Sylvia Nunn when she was doing all those tests.
Yeah,
why aren't I on the list? And then Sylvia said, "Well, okay, since you're here, you're on the list." And she was the best of the lot
by quite a distance.
And Danica, I saw Danica in Canada, and I'm a big fan of hers.
Yeah, same.
It's a shame she went NASCAR because I'd like to have seen her stay in Indy cars. And anyone
could have really got to the top end.
Being an Indy car race is pretty special.
Yeah,
and then I look at other women like Paula Murphy, and who was drag racing, and Shirley Muldowney, and then you've got Elaine Larson and people like that, and all of John Force's daughters in drag racing. Absolutely no, there's complete equality between men and women.
Yeah.
And 9 times out of 10, the women are doing the job better than the guys. Yeah. So that's encouraging. It's just going to be difficult. It's always going to be difficult for anyone to get to F1.
Yeah.
Not just women, but guys as well. But whoever the next really good woman is going to need a lot of luck on her side and probably wealthy parents, which is a shame.
But also, I think something that is going to be, you touched on it. You use the word pressure, but there's the word, the microscope, the spotlight. But obviously, with the world the way it is, we touched on the keyboard warriors of the social media, and that everything's going to be scrutinized. If a woman does make it, there's going to be criticism. They're going to be knocked down before they've done anything. Yeah. It's going to be absolutely brutal. It's going to take someone of immense talent, pockets, and
maybe we should put Amanda Nunes in a race car.
Yeah,
who's just retired from the UFC as undefeated champion.
Yeah, just
guts to get the job. I don't have the talent, but she certainly wouldn't have any truck with all the.
Yeah, if anyone gave her any grief, they'd know about it, wouldn't they?
I think it would be fantastic for F1 if you could get a genuinely good female driver.
I think it'd be brilliant.
It's like we've got an American driver now, which is always good for the sport. But it would be great to have that. But I don't really see one at the moment that I would think
No,
quite has what it takes.
and they've in terms of talent and then everything else that they need to get there, of course. Yeah.
Maybe whoever it is will just come and arrive by surprise from a strange route. Maybe they're sports cars and then make their way in. Who knows? But
yeah, or maybe
I
someone
don't
from
see
the
why it
States
shouldn't
with
happen.
maybe someone from the States with the midget cars and all that kind of thing, and the weird route through the States. Maybe, who knows?
Have you ever read any of Toby Vincent's novels about motor racing? They're
No,
really
I
good,
haven't.
and it begins with a description of a driver doing a lap and everything else, and blah blah blah. His first one, and then it turns out it's a woman, and it's not like, oh god, that's really stupid. You just become completely engaged with the narrative, and you think, yeah, okay, and you accept,
Yeah,
yes, this is a competitive woman race driver from the start. And I thought that was a really good way of making a good series about how she gets on. And
yeah,
like I say, I don't see why a woman shouldn't
yeah.
hack it in Formula One.
As you say, it's just a case of who, when, and how, isn't it? I suppose.
Yeah, and how they get there.
Yeah. Just one more thing I want to touch on before we go. Ferrari, Le Mans, they're back. I didn't see it coming. I must admit, I thought Porsche and Penske were going to be up there with Toyota. But Ferrari, it was just good to see. I loved it. Seeing Ferrari back at the top end of Le Mans, and yeah, it was good. It was good for Antonio Giovinazzi, who obviously people thought, oh well, he's out of F1, he hasn't made it, and all that nonsense. And he's now won Le Mans, which I think was fantastic.
I mean, I'm not a great Ferrari fan. I'm a huge Charles Leclerc fan, and I like Carlos.
Just as a disclaimer, I'm not a Ferrari fan either, but it was just.
But it was really funny. I found myself completely rooting for Ferrari.
Yeah.
I wanted them to win. I thought the 10th one, there's a nice synergy and all of that. We all know about the balance of power and all that nonsense, or performance, whatever they call it. And that is exactly what you don't want in F1, in case anyone's thinking of it. But, Toyota have had a reasonable run, and they've had rules massaged in their favour.
Yes.
That's one of the reasons I don't like Le Mans. I don't like the way I've never been happy since they screwed the 7-litre Fords and Chaparrals out of it at the end of '67, and then got rid of the 917s and the 512s. I don't like the way they do that. I don't think it gives the race any credibility. But I was just very happy, particularly for James Calado, because he's a mate and I like him, and I really like the fact that I remember hanging out with him on the pit wall in Japan one time when they were old cars doing demos, when he was sort of doing a bit of Force India work, and he just looked and he said, that's the era I'd most like to have raced in, and that was like 90s F1 cars. And I thought, this guy's cool.
Yeah.
And he is a lovely guy, and I was so pleased for him more than anything else.
Yeah. And I can't believe that the wider media haven't made a thing of it, especially in this country. Got a British just won Le Mans. But
yeah, well,
doesn't get the coverage.
Does Le Mans really count that much these days? I don't know.
Sadly not.
I think it does for the manufacturer, but maybe not for the driver so much.
Yeah. I think there's a hardcore sort of nucleus of people who still love Le Mans, like me. Same reason I love Indy 500, but now it's all about F1. And
I was quite chuffed to see that Corvette won.
I predicted that as well. I put a preview out saying, look out for was it the 33 or 55? I can't remember what car it was, but look at the yellow Corvette. Look out for it. It's going to go well. And it won.
It came from behind as well to do it on their last outing. So
on the last stint, when they won, I must admit, I was sitting at home just like, thank you. Pat on the back. But it was good to see.
Corvette fan, so I was very happy with that. But it was just nice to see James getting that thing done, and very satisfactory.
Yeah, lovely to see. Very quickly, something we're going to touch on. Final thing. we said that we've got Michael Creasy in, who's recently done British Touring Car.
Well, hi, Michael. I met Michael at Croft last year with Diana Binks.
Oh, yes.
So,
Yes, and Diana's great as well. So yes, good evening, Creasy. I think he might be alluding to something here, but I'm not gonna push it. It says, what do we both think of the British Touring Car Championship right now as Matt New and Jason Plato have gone? And he says, shall we bring a character in? Are you alluding to something? Anyway, both terrific carriages. Both have done a huge amount for the British Touring Car Championship. Especially Jason, who's a lunatic, and we love him. It doesn't seem as fun this year. I don't know if you've been following it at all, but it doesn't seem as fun without those two involved.
no, well, you can't manufacture stuff like that, unfortunately.
No, it just
It has
clicks.
to evolve. And by the way, anyone who hasn't read Jason's book,
Oh,
do yourself a favour.
it's fabulous, isn't it?
I just read the captions and it had me laughing.
Oh, he's brilliant.
Well,
And also, Jason, if you see this, you said you'd come on for a part 2 because we chatted for 4 hours last time. So if you see this, JP, you need to come back. Thank you.
both good guys, and it was a good sort of anti-hero matchup, wasn't it?
Oh, it was great. And
I
everyone knows
like
about
the
Rockingham and
Touring Car
everything,
Championship, and I wish I'd gone to Donington because I'd have loved to see Nick Hamilton having his fantastic.
Oh,
And I bet I could have spotted that Lewis was the guy wearing funny pajamas or whatever.
and there's still some people that said it was a publicity thing. I thought, how can it be publicity? He announced it 3 days afterwards. Anyway, but seeing Nick, just seeing him driving the car is incredible. But what a result! And the call on tyres, and it was a real feel good thing.
That. And I'm a big fan of his, and I'm a big fan of Lewis's.
Same.
I was really stoked to see Nick get that.
Yeah, I think everyone was. Everyone was. I've never understood the flack that Nick gets. It's just baffling to me. Just an incredible
Why
guy.
people give him flack, and he can barely move his ankles.
I mean, the guy can barely walk, and he's just incredible. And I'm not going to open a can of worms here, but there's other drivers with disabilities, either born with or have had them, like Billy Munger, for example, and they're all lauded, and rightly so. Yet Nick gets grief. I'm just going to leave that. There's another reason there, but I'm not going to go into it.
I encountered him coming out of McLaren, the old McLaren, when I was squiring Betty Hill in. It was raining, and they had steep steps there. And I introduced them on the steps, and they were both utterly charming with the other, which was really nice to see. And Betty had a new hip, so she was struggling to get up the steps. Nick was struggling to get down. It's the kind of thing where you think, like with Zanardi, when I was at the race where Henry Surtees got killed, Alex was swinging himself down the stairs on his crutches, and you're thinking, with either him or Nick, if they fall, there's no way I'm going to be able to catch them because they're both well bulked up.
Yeah,
it was just this.
I don't realise about Nick. He's built, isn't he?
Yeah, but it was this kind of juxtaposition of the wife and mother of 2 world champions and the brother of a world meeting. It was just lovely to see an old generation and a young generation just completely like this. And Nick was absolutely charming. And I'm a huge fan of his because I think he's got big balls with what he does.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
As I understand it, he finds his own budgets.
Yes, apparently he has been offered assistance and he's turned it down every time.
We've helped each other a little bit on funding one way and another with sponsors, which is just a nice thing to be able to do both ways round. If it wasn't for Nick, we wouldn't have our current sponsor, and I helped him with another one in the past. So,
that's lovely. That's fantastic to hear.
It's a good story for BTCC to have drivers like him.
Yeah, definitely, absolutely. Just on that note, if anyone is free at the weekend, they've got the Brands Hatch Super Touring Power event down at Brands Hatch this Saturday and Sunday, which is going to be fantastic. Some cool cars, great drivers down there. So do head down there. I'll be there on a Sunday. There was one more thing, or was that it? I think that was it. Yes, we'll go with that. Michael Crease has just said it was a massive pleasure to meet you at Croft. Wish he had more time. So maybe next time we can have a catch up.
That's
Right.
right.
Okay. We've got
Good luck with everything this year.
Sorry.
Let's wishing Michael good luck with everything.
Oh yes, absolutely. It feels like he's itching to tell us something. He keeps putting little teasery things out on social media, and he's not telling us. But yes, hopefully see you back in the car soon, Creasy. Good man. Right, okay, got to wind it down. It's 2 hours 45 minutes. It's flown by, been absolutely fantastic. But I've got to ask three questions. Do you have a favourite? Well, given that you know so many and you've written about so many, it's a terrible question because they might come back and have a word with you. Do you have a favourite racer of all time? Whether it's someone you watched in person or it's a terrible question, I know.
Does it have to be someone I watched or just somebody from racing?
Just someone out there.
I'm a huge Lewis fan. I love the way he he's engagingly naive at times, but he's a decent, proper bloke. Dan Gurney, I absolutely loved, but I think of all my ultimate favorite would be Jackie for everything he stands for.
Absolutely, and what he's done for the sport and what he's doing now, obviously with Helen and Race Against Dementia.
Yeah. I think it. You know how you see people in, maybe you see their picture in the paper and whatever, and they make you smile. It's always that way with him. And everything he represents and has achieved, just a proper guy. When he's not with us, that's going to be a really bad moment.
Yeah, just from what I know, and I don't know Jackie. I have tried to make contact with him, but anyway, I don't know, he just encapsulates all the good things about what we love about motorsport.
Yeah, honourable.
And life as well. Wonderful.
When he used to call Ken Tyrrell a beacon of integrity, but I think that applies just as equally to Jackie.
That's a lovely phrase.
It is, isn't it? That's a key phrase to have used on anyone. And I can understand why he said that about Ken. And they had one contract the entire time they were together. Wow. And that was the very first, and then the rest was all done on a handshake.
Wow. That's integrity right there, isn't it? Okay, favorite car of all time, whether it be a land speed one or a question as well, isn't it?
That's a tricky one. It would either be the Blue Flame rocket car or Goldenrod, the piston engine land speed car.
Oh yeah, that's a good show.
Put it this way: if with some of my friends, my female friends, if you were, when you have that discussion, like if you were a car, who would you be? The ultimate sort of compliment you could pay is that they would be Goldenrod.
Right. Yeah.
That's a bit convoluted, but I would say Goldenrod's probably my ultimate favorite.
Oh, it's a heck of a machine. Fantastic. This is a tough one. We're almost after a soundbite almost, but I mean, can you, in a phrase, encapsulate why you love motorsport and speed and racing? It's a very tricky question, but I've always wondered, because I don't know how to encapsulate my love of it. I was wondering if you could put it into words.
Because it's a sport which I think encapsulates the human spirit to the nth degree.
Oh, that's perfect.
And that works right across the board. It doesn't matter whether you're a driver, a team manager, an engineer, a hack, or a snapper, or whatever. I think that's it.
I might have to steal that. I mean, that's absolutely spot on. Perfect. Absolutely brilliant. Right, folks. I mean, it's been over two or three.
Do I get the job then? Do I pass the interview?
We'll come back to you in 3 days.
Okay. All right.
No, of course. It's been absolutely fantastic. Thank you so much for coming on, having a chat.
It's been a pleasure, and I hope everyone who tuned in to begin with is still awake and that you enjoyed some of it.
Well, I'm just looking at the numbers. The numbers are still up, so we're very, very good. And thank you everyone who's tuned in, who's commented, interacted with it, both on this and with all the other chats we've had and with the page in general. It's been absolutely fantastic. And here's to the next 100. I'll have to find some people to come on.
Must be someone with black and white spots, won't it, like a Dalmatian?
We'll have to see who the next one is. Who could it be?
But thank you for giving me the 100. I really appreciate that.
Well, no, when I was looking through who I could approach and everything, I thought he's someone who's been behind the wheel. They've been behind the pen, behind the mic. They've done everything. And I thought, when you popped up, I thought, yes. So, no, thank you so much for coming on. Absolutely fantastic to speak with you. And I'm sure we can catch up somewhere at some point, somewhere down the line, if possible.
Yeah,
that'd be wonderful.
Thanks.
Yeah, great stuff. So thank you very much, everyone, for tuning in and for your support. We'll have another one coming up soon. For the 100th chat, we're out. Thank you very much, everyone. And thanks again to you, David. It's been fantastic having everyone's company this evening. Thank you.
Thank you.